After 17 years of absence in a foreign land, he finally returned to Korea. Before him lay a scene shrouded in mist with a cold, desolate building standing as a witness to the buried past. This was not just a return, but the beginning of a journey of revenge and uncovering the truth where all painful memories would be unearthed from the very start. Before him were two urns of ashes, the last remains of his parents, Haejeong and Sunyeok. The silence in the funeral hall made time seem to stand still while the pain silently gnawed at his heart. This was not just a farewell, but the start of a vow. Those responsible for this tragedy would have to pay. The young man stood silently before the memorial portrait, his eyes firm but filled with pain. After 17 years, he had returned, not to lament, but to begin a journey of revenge. The cold question slipped out from the smiling lips: what is the value of a life? To him, it was no longer sacred, but merely the beginning of a plan calculated long ago. Fear filled the eyes of the child, a suffocating feeling when caught between life and death, when everything familiar suddenly vanished. The violent storm that night was like a fateful verdict. 17 years ago, at 10:32 p.m., the boy was swept into tragedy in the sea as the giant ship rocked in a lightning bolt that tore through the sky. In the raging sea, the boy panicked, struggling in the freezing water, desperately calling out for his parents in vain, a heart-wrenching scream amidst the fateful storm. Thunder tore through the night sky, lightning flashed across the rain like a foreboding omen of the disaster that had befallen the boy's life. In the torrential rain amidst the dark ocean, the boy helplessly screamed for his parents, his cry echoing through the storm like it was tearing apart his heart, but all that was met was an endless, cold emptiness. Despite the huge waves and the roaring storm, the boy swam frantically in desperation, his eyes gleaming with a desperate determination, as if he would not give up hope of finding his family again as long as he had a breath left. Amidst the white veil of rain, the boy froze upon seeing a dark figure drifting limply ahead. His heart was as if gripped by extreme fear, knowing that this could be a truth he never wanted to face. The boy struggled in the icy water, crying out for his mother in despair as his trembling hand reached out to the familiar hair, a fragile hope amidst the nightmare that was engulfing everything. Within the swirling, violent waters, the boy clung to his mother's lifeless body. Between the darkness and the stormy sky, the pain was evident on his young face as he touched his beloved parent for the last time. Amidst the raging storm, the boy, having just escaped the water, trembled as he clung to the black rock, his panicked and painful eyes gazing towards the dark sky where his family had just vanished forever. A desperate cry tore through the stormy rain. The boy, with eyes full of panic, reached out to grab his mother, but a violent wave suddenly swept in, pulling him away, completely separating him from his loved one in the nightmare of the sea at night. The small body sank gradually into the cold depths of the sea, his eyes still wide with utmost fear, unable to close. The boy struggled in vain in the deep water, as if still holding on to the hope of finding the embrace of his parents who had forever departed. In a moment of life and death, the boy endured the cruel sensation of suffocation. Despite being surrounded by despair, his eyes burst with life. He had to resurface, had to keep living, even if there was only a glimmer of hope left. In the cold, dark heart of the ocean, the boy struggled among the sinking bodies, his small hands reaching up in despair, as if fighting against a cruel fate. Life was now just a faint light above him. Small air bubbles slowly rose in the deep water, drawing the gaze towards the faint light above, where the hope of survival seemed to be fading away. A static frame, yet heavy with emotion, like the last breath dissolving into nothingness. In the dark waters, the boy panicked, swimming among the lifeless bodies floating around him. The light from above shone down, reflecting on his young, fearful face. It seemed he was the only survivor, struggling at the thin line between life and death. In the deep, cold waters, the body of a man drifted silently, his face smeared with blood, still holding a strange smile, as if carrying a secret he never got to reveal. The faint light from the surface only added to the eeriness of this moment. Around the boy were numerous lifeless bodies floating in the dark sea. Blood spread in the cold blue water, creating a scene both tragic and horrifying. Outstretched hands seemed to be grasping at life that had slipped away. The boy opened his eyes wide, frozen in shock as he stared ahead. His eyes were filled with panic and astonishment as he discovered something in the deep water that was beyond anything a child could imagine. The air seemed to freeze, as if his breath was being squeezed out by the revelation. In the cold and dark water, the boy's eyes widened as he saw his parents' bodies sinking, their clothes stained with blood like haunting marks. The harsh reality hit him like an undertow. They were gone. The cry, "Dad! Mom!" was choked back in despair, buried deep beneath the ocean of memories. The boy stretched out his hand in desperation in the cold heart of the ocean, his panic-stricken eyes clinging to a final glimmer of hope amidst the water that was squeezing the life out of him. There were no more calls, just fear and the instinct to survive, driving him toward the distant surface. Just as the boy was about to exhaust his last strength, a man emerged from the rain and the raging waves, grabbed the boy tightly and shouted loudly, "Calm down, Taeha." The intensity in his voice and the firm grip pulled the boy back from the brink of death. In the midst of the fierce storm, the man reassured the boy, his eyes firm and full of life. "Good, you're still moving, aren't you?" Amidst the swirling waves, his voice was a lifeline, pulling Taeha out of fear and despair. Taeha looked up in panic through the pouring rain, his shaking voice calling out in desperation, "Grandpa." The horror was evident in the boy's eyes as his fragile life seemed to be drowning in the stormy sea and sky. Chairman Jin Seok, now 72 years old, despite the rain, wind, and raging sea, clung to hope with determination. In the midst of danger, he raised his head, silently thanking heaven, for at least it seemed that fate had not yet turned its back on them. Amidst the roaring waves, Taeha choked back a scream to his grandfather, tears mixing with rain. He had just seen his parents still underwater. But his grandfather's response was cold and desperate, extinguishing the fragile hope. He knew it was too late to turn back. In the chaotic sea and sky, Jin Seok gripped Taeha's shoulder tightly, his eyes piercing through the rain like a knife. With a gravity he had never shown before, he told his grandson to listen carefully, for what he was about to say would change Taeha's life forever. Taeha was taken aback by his grandfather's words amidst the rushing water. Though his heart was filled with pain, Jin Seok entrusted him with a sacred wish. Taeha was to be the future heir of Cheonggu. In that moment, the fate of a child took a turn toward a path full of challenges and destiny. His grandfather handed Taeha a fountain pen, a small object carrying a great responsibility. It was not just a symbol of inheritance, but also a key to finding the person who could protect him in the future. Lawyer Kim In-soo. Amidst the raging waves, a glimmer of hope was passed on. In the pouring rain, his grandfather tried to convey his final message to Taeha, not to trust anyone and to go to a secret place as soon as he set foot in Korea. But the sentence was cut off by a fateful wave. Taeha could only scream out in panic, "Grandpa." Amidst the raging storm and rising water, Taeha cried out in despair, begging his grandfather to save his parents first. His eyes were filled with tears, staring into the dark water where his parents were still sinking, his young heart shattering with helplessness and fear. Jin Seok silently clenched his fist, his body drenched in water and blood amidst the raging storm. Though his body was severely injured, his eyes still showed determination and deep sorrow as he was forced to make an irreversible decision. Taeha's eyes widened in horror, tears indistinguishable from rainwater. He stammered out a choked, "Grandpa," as if he couldn't believe what was happening before his eyes, a terrible premonition tearing apart his young heart. The boy was stunned, his eyes wide open in despair as he heard the cruel truth. His shaking hand clutched the object his grandfather had left behind, his heart shattered amidst the waves. The loss was no longer a vague fear, it had become a harsh reality beyond salvation. He let go. The final words echoed like a will. "Taeha, you must live, no matter what." Amidst the roaring storm, the warm hand slipped out of reach, leaving the child alone on the cold sea surface with the burden of survival and a future full of hatred. Taeha screamed out in despair amidst the pouring rain as his grandfather's hand slipped out of his grasp. The moment of parting was torn apart by the raging waves and choked sobs, marking the beginning of a child's solitary journey amidst the ocean and a destiny full of loss. Taeha turned back amidst the raging waves, his shaking eyes catching a glimpse of his grandfather, who was slowly sinking into the darkness of the sea. That moment was frozen in time amidst the storm as the two were separated forever in an irredeemable tragedy. A bolt of lightning tore through the pitch-black night sky, illuminating a fateful moment like a declaration of destiny. The thunder boomed like the cry of the earth and sky, witnessing the sacred last words Taeha had just received. Tragedy, willpower, and burden were beginning to be etched deeply into the young boy's fate. The gentle light of dawn seeped through the emerald-green water, casting upon Taeha's innocent face as he drifted silently amidst the vast ocean. The aftermath of the tragedy still lingered at the corners of his eyes, but in this rare moment of peace, the boy who carried his family's last testament had officially embarked on a journey of survival, carrying both pain and hope. He was the sole survivor and the destined heir. Taeha's face now seemed to have let go of everything, the pain of losing his parents, his grandfather's sacrifice, and the storm he had just endured. He lay still in the crystal-clear water, his eyes half-closed as if in a dream, but the tranquility on his face revealed a deep-seated pain. This was not the end, but the beginning of a fate that had been entrusted to him. The boy's eyes slowly opened amidst the dazzling sunlight reflecting off the water. Despite being exhausted and drained, his eyes still shone with life, a faint spark of awareness amidst the tragedy. It was as if his soul had been pulled back from the brink of despair, with his grandfather's final words still echoing in his heart. Taeha, you must live at all costs. Taeha suddenly woke up in the calm sea and sky after the storm, looking around in bewilderment. The debris floating in the azure water brought back memories of the brutal past. Although his body still trembled and his eyes were not yet steady, something unusual caught his sight, making his small heart tighten. A feeling of unease surged once more. An enormous ship loomed before Taeha, the sunlight reflecting off its metallic surface like a witness to a fateful turning point. The clock read 1:51 p.m. in the Gulf of Aden, a milestone marking a moment of life and death on the high seas. Taeha, tiny amidst the turbulent water, opened his eyes wide, looking up at the ship. Hope surged, mixed with lingering fear. A new life was about to begin, but what he had lost would forever be etched in his heart. A ray of light shone through the windswept long hair, revealing the face of a man with an enigmatic smile. His eyes, hidden in the shadows, exuded confidence and calculation. The appearance of this man signaled a new chapter full of turmoil about to unfold in Taeha's life. It was unclear whether he was a savior or a looming danger. Taeha fell hard to the ground, his body still trembling from exhaustion and shock. His eyes opened wide in panic as he suddenly regained consciousness, as if he had just escaped from a prolonged nightmare in the ocean. His soaked clothes, disheveled hair, and rapid breathing reflected the unsubsided horror. A new journey was beginning, but now the young boy was left all alone. Two foreign men in protective gear, holding guns, looked down at Taeha with surprise and curiosity. One of them, a blond man, chuckled lightly, "Oh, the kid's still alive?" Meanwhile, the clear blue sky and the containers in the background painted a clear picture. Taeha had been rescued onto a cargo ship, but this place didn't seem entirely safe. The atmosphere was both relieved and uneasy because from the looks and weapons of these men, things were only just beginning. The blond man immediately turned around and shouted loudly, informing his superior, "Capo. The kid's awake. He's not dead." His eyes widened in a mix of surprise and urgency, signaling that Taeha's survival was unexpected. The clear blue sky in the background contrasted sharply with the chaos they had just experienced, highlighting this moment of life and death. It seemed that Taeha's awakening would trigger new turmoil. As Taeha regained consciousness, he found himself face to face with a tall man holding a gun, making him jump in alertness. A strange but logical thought crossed his mind. Is he Italian? Perhaps because of the man's accent, appearance, or how the others addressed him as capo, a term commonly used in the Italian mafia. A sense of danger loomed, but Taeha tried to remain calm to assess the situation. The blond man turned around again, shouting "Capo" with urgency as if to report something important to their leader. The seriousness in his eyes and voice indicated that the situation had gone beyond expectations, especially since the boy they thought was dead had survived. The atmosphere on the ship's deck was tense, with all eyes focused on Capo, the powerful figure who had yet to reveal himself. A voice boomed from above, "Come here." The man known as Capo had finally spoken. Standing on the ship's crow's nest, he exuded authority and power as if controlling the entire situation from the top. The dazzling sunlight shone down on the deck, but his voice was as cold as steel, leaving no room for hesitation. The encounter was about to begin, and it would not be simple. Taeha sat slumped on the floor, his eyes still dazed and disoriented from the nightmare he had just experienced. One of the two guards, a red-haired man with a tattoo on his neck, bent down and spoke in a tone that was somewhat softer than usual. "Kid, can you understand us?" Meanwhile, the other guard turned his back and sighed in frustration. "Gosh, she's up there again." It seemed that Keipo was a special figure who stood apart and controlled everything from a distance. Amidst the unfamiliar atmosphere and strange words, Taeha began to realize that he had fallen into the hands of a completely new and unknown force. A close-up of the red-haired guard revealed a strange tattoo on his neck, a symbol resembling a stylized ship's steering wheel, looking both ancient and menacing. The angled light cast a shadow that divided his face, making his half-smile even more mysterious. The appearance of this tattoo could be a sign that he belonged to a distinct organization, possibly pirates or an armed group with underground power. The boy's face was stern, his sharp eyes gleaming with caution and determination, an expression not typically seen at his age. Despite being soaked and exhausted after the ordeal, he gritted his teeth to remain calm, as if trying to memorize the tattoo on the man's neck. This was a crucial turning point, from a panicked child to someone harboring a will to survive and initial doubts about the world he had been drawn into. Against the bright blue sky, a figure suddenly plummeted from the towering ship's mast. The daring action and extraordinary speed made everything seem frozen in a moment. The woman, whose identity was unclear, had jumped without hesitation, bringing with her a burst of intense and mysterious energy, signaling the arrival of a character who should not be underestimated. This was a moment when the balance could begin to shift. The woman landed on the deck like a black lightning bolt, her knee firmly planted on the ground, her long hair flying wildly with the force of the fall, causing the floor to shake with a loud Kong sound. The boy in front of her froze, his eyes wide with amazement as he stared at the woman who had just descended as if from the sky. Without needing to say a word, her imposing presence and decisive action proved that she was not someone to be taken lightly. A turning point was unfolding before the boy's eyes. The tall woman, with a cold and stern demeanor, leaned down and looked straight at the boy with a mix of suspicion and caution in her eyes. The sea breeze whipped her black vest, causing her long hair to flow like an iron whip against the blue sky. Her question came out like a command. "Kid, how did you get on our ship?" A tone that was both interrogative and warning. Clearly, to her, a mysterious child appearing in the dangerous waters could not be a coincidence. A blond man reported with a naive expression, "Keipo, I think this kid doesn't understand us." Immediately, from above, Keipo, the powerful woman from earlier, erupted in anger. "Then go find someone who can use body language or someone who can translate." The small commotion on the ship's deck further indicated that the boy was in an unfamiliar environment, where everything was beyond his control. The boy stood silently, his eyes lost and anxious. Sweat trickled down his cheekbones, his blue eyes reflecting unease as he failed to understand what those around him were saying. His expression was both bewildered and cautious, as if trying to guess what would happen next in this unfamiliar and tense situation. The boy trembled as he recounted, a yacht was attacked when it passed by, causing the group of adults to freeze, their eyes turning serious. The woman smiled sharply, confirming, "The kid understands us." Then she leaned down and asked directly, "Where are you from?" The boy looked up, his eyes welling up with tears but remaining resolute. "I'm Korean. When the storm came, people with guns boarded the yacht, killed my parents and grandfather." The woman narrowed her eyes, smiling with a hint of intrigue. "So you fell into the sea and then were brought onto an Italian ship? Our Salerno family's ship?" The boy was taken aback, his eyes wide open, his breath seemingly caught in his throat, unable to respond to the woman's probing question. The group of adults laughed loudly, as if the strange story the boy had just told was nothing more than a joke. The woman emphasized, "And not just anywhere, but right in the Gulf of Aden, the Middle East." The atmosphere suddenly turned peculiar, making the boy feel even more lost among these strangers. The woman drew her sword, the cold metal glinting in her hand. She smiled faintly, saying bluntly, "Sorry, but we don't intend to believe in such an overly coincidental story." The air immediately became tense and threatening. Regina Salerno, the head of the Salerno family's commercial branch, coldly drew her sword, looked down at the boy, and asked, "Hey kid, what reason do we have not to throw you back into the sea?" The boy froze, his eyes wild with fear as he stared at the sword tip pointing directly at his forehead, sweat dripping down in fear and helplessness. His throat constricted, the boy tightened his lips, trying to remain calm on the thin line between life and death. A drop of sweat slowly rolled down his cheek, reflecting the rising fear in his heart. The boy hesitantly held out the fountain pen and whispered, "This was a keepsake my grandfather gave me." The woman was momentarily taken aback. The boy declared confidently, I am the grandson of Chairman Jin Seoko of Chonga Group, Korea, the eldest son of Jin Sunyeok. The boy said, returning me to the group will be more beneficial to you than throwing me into the sea. She was taken aback. Chonga Group? The boy remained silent, his determined gaze meeting the woman's skeptical eyes. Regina ordered urgently, quickly check the news from Korea. The man asked, do you know any other languages? The boy looked puzzled. Huh. The boy replied, yes. Cantonese, English, Japanese, Arabic, Spanish, Hindi. Esperanto. I can speak basic phrases in those languages. Ma'am, here's the news from Korea. The three of them focused intently on the phone screen, their faces tense with a mix of strain and surprise. The woman smiled with great interest, a mysterious spark in her eyes. The woman said sternly, if you can contact someone in Korea, keep this fountain pen. Give it to lawyer Kim In-soo and he will help you. Please contact someone else. Don't contact my family. 1:12 a.m. Seoul, Korea. The man picked up the phone and said, hello? He adjusted his tone and said, since it's international, feel free to speak in English. Regina called and said, have you seen the photo I sent? We're holding the valuable grandson of the group. Should we send him back to Korea? The person in Korea calmly sipped his drink and asked, what do you want? She smiled with satisfaction and made a demand. $10 million. Cash delivery at Russell Trade in the Panama Canal. You have 24 hours. Come in person. I'm busy too, can't waste time talking. If you pay enough, I'll release the person immediately. He put down his glass, coldly picked up the mic, and prepared to give orders. He lowered his voice and counteroffered. $1 million. The man shouted amidst the chaotic party, kill the kid and I'll pay $1 million. He yelled into the phone, kill him within 5 minutes and send me the video. I'll transfer the money immediately. He hesitated, worried. What if I kill him and you don't pay? The villain angrily retorted, you think you can negotiate with me? I can transfer $1 million to you with just 3 clicks. The villain threatened, if you don't kill the kid, I'll expose you as the attackers and pin all the blame on you. He reported back, I've relayed the message. I've contacted the mercenaries around here. Don't worry. The mysterious man sat silently in the darkness, sipping his drink slowly, the fading sunlight casting a cold glow on half his face. The boy stood frozen, his bewildered eyes fixed on the bright phone on the table, surrounded by darkness that felt like a tightening web. The boy's trembling eyes reflected extreme fear as he faced a truth he couldn't bear. The boy muttered softly, his gaze shifting from fear to calmness, as if he had understood the situation he was facing. The woman declared coldly, her eyes sharp as a knife, I've got no more reason to keep you alive. The boy trembled, fell to his knees and begged, please, spare me. The boy stared intently, his voice lowering, do you know what that means? From the start, they planned to kill you to seize power. In my world, this is all too familiar. The boy's shocked and panicked expression as the harsh truth hit him. The group jeered, surrounding the trembling boy in the room, heightening the tense and desperate atmosphere. The boy's legs trembled violently, unable to stand steadily due to extreme fear. The boy gripped the pen tightly, his hand shaking but his eyes burning with determination. A subordinate rushed in, alerting, Capo, we've got an attacker, causing chaos in the room. The subordinate shouted, 3 speedboats and an armed helicopter. All are armed. Armed helicopter? Is it Interpol? No, they're not responding to radio calls. They're ignoring radio calls? Who's crazy enough to do that? She turned back to the child with a cold gaze, her face tense due to the unexpected situation. She gritted her teeth, suspecting that the Korean was searching for the child from the previous call. The boy bravely stabbed the pen into his hand to create an escape opportunity. All 3 were stunned by the boy's bold action. The boy trembled but stood firm, declaring, killing me is pointless now. The woman glared angrily, while the boy clenched his fist, blood dripping from the wound, unwavering. The boy held out his bloody fist with a determined gaze, accept me. As long as I have the power to avenge, I'll be loyal forever. Salerno's tattoo. When did this kid see it? She burst out laughing at the boy's request, her eyes full of contempt. She joyfully ordered a party to be held while the boy stood silently, his hands still bleeding. She asked coldly, her sharp eyes fixed on the boy, who was trembling with his head bowed over the blood on the table. She gazed deeply into his eyes, confirming one last time, "You want the power to avenge, even if it means being stained with blood?" In the heavy downpour, the boy screamed desperately, "Taeha, you must inherit Cheonggu." The boy clenched his fist, his eyes filled with determination. She smiled, amused by the boy's resistance. She kicked open the door and ordered, "Follow me." From now on, the boy's life belonged to Salerno. Live and die for the family. With her head held high, she faced the armed helicopter, ready to step into battle. Taeha stood frozen on the ship's deck, his eyes wide with shock as he looked up at the sky, blood dripping from his hand. 17 years later, Taeha appeared, mature and confident, with cold eyes and a self-assured smile. No body was found, but this was still the only place for him to pay his respects to the deceased. The young man smiled quietly before the resting place, his eyes reflecting a mix of serenity and deep determination. His eyes suddenly wavered, noticing something unusual in the silence. A car sped towards him in a tense moment as if it wanted to shatter the stillness. A burst of gunfire shattered the rear window and he dodged the bullets by a hair's breadth, his cold eyes filled with killing intent. The hail of bullets tore through the glass wall and the urn, shattering everything and sending shards flying everywhere amidst the deafening explosions. A group of assassins stepped out of a black car, simultaneously aiming their guns and firing without hesitation. One of the assassins, enraged, stamped his foot and cursed his companions for missing the target. Lee Jang-gu, the security manager of the Cheonggu Group, ordered a search for the CEO. Lee Jang-gu was furious, unable to believe that someone dared to kidnap the CEO of the Cheonggu Group and expected to survive. A subordinate reported that they had found the suspect's car, just as manager Lee Jang-gu had described. The people from Cheonggu emphasized, "We must ensure the CEO's absolute safety." A violent explosion destroyed both the car and the surrounding area. Blood splattered behind the manager as one of his subordinates was killed right in front of him. The man in green descended from the sky, swinging his sword with both hands, blood splattering everywhere across the battlefield. The Cheonggu manager stood stunned, looking down at the deep gash in his abdomen, his face filled with outrage. The manager panicked, realizing that his bulletproof vest couldn't withstand the previous blow. An enraged attacker charged forward, cursing his opponent for being cowardly. The young man turned around coldly and retorted, "It's not your turn to judge." The young man unleashed a powerful spinning kick to his opponent's back, a swift counterattack that caught the enemy off guard. A deadly hook sent blood spraying as the opponent crashed to the ground midair. Empty eyes, blood stained behind. He had realized his impending death. Covered in blood, he stood silently in the night. He had completed his revenge. With a calm expression still stained with blood, his revenge was complete. Leaving the flames behind, he walked away without looking back. He got into the car, the flames and black smoke still swirling behind him. He opened the paper bag, his cold eyes filled with calculation, his cheeks still smeared with dried blood. He stepped out of the car, carrying the paper bag, and walked resolutely across the empty parking lot. The bound man trembled, begging for mercy, while Taeha coldly opened the trunk, his eyes showing no hesitation. Kim In-soo, the former lawyer of Cheonggu Electronics, frantically justified that he was just following orders. Taeha opened the trunk, revealing a mysterious golden armor inside. Money scattered around the figure amidst desperate screams. $1 million. CEO. He smiled coldly under the light shining on his blood-stained face. The money promised 17 years ago seems to be overdue. The man stuttered in panic. Damn it, $1 million. A cold voice echoed through the microphone. The metal lighter opened with a click, a cold light flickering in the sleeve of his vest. The blue flame reflected on the vest fabric, creating a tense atmosphere before the impending action. The lighter's flame illuminated the frightened man's face, his words revealing a revenge predetermined by the past. He coldly raised his hand, the flame from the lighter surging. The end was near. The lawyer screamed in despair as the flames consumed his body amidst the pile of money. Taeha walked through the burning flames, his expressionless eyes watching his enemy scream in agony. Taeha stood before the burning car, smiling lightly as if he had finally shed his burden. Taeha lit a cigarette, whispering his name and his parents, his eyes filled with a vengeful emotion. Taeha bowed his head, the flame of the lighter whispering, "Sorry for being late." Black smoke swirls up to the sky, ashes fluttering under the sunlight piercing through the clouds, a conclusion both tragic and serene. Taking slow steps among the corpses and smoke, he takes a drag on a cigarette, his eyes calm amidst the bloody hell. A peaceful morning in the neighborhood with a clear blue sky, modern buildings and puppy pet stores lining the street, marking the beginning of a seemingly ordinary day. The male protagonist appears, his face cold, wearing a black mask, his sharp and focused eyes fixed ahead as he rushes in at high speed, a sign that a tense confrontation is about to unfold. Two men in suits, armed and shouting in anger upon discovering the protagonist's intrusion. One yells, "You maniac! Who do you think this is?" And the other orders, "Kill him." The scene instantly turns fiery and dangerous. The protagonist charges between the two bodyguards, delivering a fatal blow in an instant, blood splattering everywhere, leaving no chance for resistance. The protagonist's cold gaze cuts through the blood, reflecting his resolute and calm demeanor amidst the chaos. The protagonist walks coldly among the dead bodies, his hands still clenched around the bloody knife, his figure exuding an aura of an unstoppable avenger. The protagonist approaches an employee wearing protective clothing, who is frightened and sitting on the floor, blood still on the table and file cabinets, the atmosphere tense and suffocating. The man in a blue shirt, his face panic-stricken, sweating profusely, looks up trembling and stammers, Who sent you?" Fear evident in his eyes. The man shouts in desperation, trying to warn, "You don't know who we work for. It's Chonggu, you fool." He continues to threaten, "Do you think you'll be safe after this?" Attempting to salvage the situation by mentioning the power behind them. The young man calmly wipes the blood off his knife, his eyes cold and indifferent, reminding, "AH Holdings, a private security company hired by Chonggu." His statement clearly shows that he is fully informed and unafraid of the power behind them. The man tries to remain calm, revealing, "Our task is to protect the secrets of Chonggu's directors and key executives outside work hours, especially in the Gangbok area. Most of their time outside of protection duties is spent monitoring the private lives of those who oppose Chonggu, including journalists and whistleblowers. They carry out kidnappings, assaults, murders, and other violent acts under contract, essentially functioning as a professional criminal organization." The two bound individuals struggle to break free, making desperate, futile attempts to resist. The masked man stands coldly, throwing the knife to the ground in front of the two bound hostages, his gaze full of menace. He orders the three hostages to leave and warns that no one is to reveal that they saw him. A flash of red against a white background signals the sudden appearance of a new character. The three bound individuals, now freed, sit stunned around the fallen knife on the floor, still shaken by what just happened. An elderly man, knife in hand, approaches the masked young man, his eyes hesitant as if contemplating something, suddenly heightening the tension. The elderly man shouts thanks as he makes a hasty escape, but his rushed action draws the attention of the captors, catching the masked young man off guard and prompting one of the henchmen to shout in response to the chaos. The white-haired young man turns back upon hearing the shout, "Hui," his face bruised and his eyes full of anger. The man in a blue shirt frantically asks if the attacker is a relative of the victims amidst the scene of death and bloodshed in the office. The masked man makes a phone call, stating that it's hard to talk with the others still there. He requests the schedule of high-ranking executives for the week, emphasizing that emergency meeting directive number 1 has been issued. The panicked man refuses to disclose information, fearing he will be killed along with his family if he talks. He threatens to gouge out the other's eyes if he doesn't confess, asking him to raise his hand if he wants to talk. The building screen displays news that the Chonggu Elephants team has made it to the Korean series finals for the 12th consecutive time. A group of homeless people gather to eat on the stairs in the morning light, surrounded by trash, empty bottles, and posters stuck to the wall. A dead cockroach lies on its back on the tile floor, surrounded by scattered leaflets in the daylight. A man steps on the dead cockroach, crushing it underfoot. The protagonist contemplates smoking Korean cigarettes instead of cigars because cigars would be too conspicuous in the crowd. A city traffic scene with the sound of car horns. He has returned to Korea after a long absence. But this country has gone mad. The president addresses the public, promising benefits for all citizens, a populist promise amidst social chaos and contradictions. The president declares strongly to the nation, vowing to use all constitutional powers to wage war against crime and violence, a resolute political promise amidst social turmoil. While passionately declaring the eradication of crime, the president faces the very reality he denies. The president, who had declared war on criminal organizations, is assassinated shortly after his speech. The year 1990 closes a term in blood, warning that the war against the darkness is not won by mere rhetoric. Following the president's death, no one dares to stand up to restore order. The police gradually collaborate with private organizations and the country sinks into a vortex of violence and money. Amidst a seemingly peaceful society, he walks silently, a man carrying a bloody past, returning to where it all began. Changa colludes with criminal organizations to manipulate the media and eliminate opponents. Right now, in front of him, walls are plastered with faces backed by money and violence, lies that have become the new norm. The manipulated media has made people forget about politics. Even if a dog were to run for president, they would trust and vote for it as long as it was marketed skillfully enough. Among the flashy skyscrapers, the ramshackle slums sit next to them like a deliberately forgotten stain. Yet, people still believe that Cheonggu is a corporation of the people. A blind faith amidst a harsh reality of polarization. The young man steps through the glass door, his eyes cold and his demeanor calm, as if he is familiar with every false mask in the society, a tranquil presence carrying an impending storm. He walks into the convenience store, greeted with a casual, everyday smile. But no one knows that the person who just passed the counter is the epicenter of an impending wave that will sweep away this artificial order. With a cold expression, he hands over money to the counter staff, requesting a pack of cigarettes. Not just any cigarettes, but a specific kind, potentially a sign of a much larger plan. The counter staff looks at the young man handing over the money, a dubious expression on his face. He can't understand why the request is so peculiar, but still tries to serve, showing the growing strangeness in the air. His cold eyes light up in the space with a serious and confident air, as if nothing around him can throw him off course. Both of them hand over money almost simultaneously, their eyes meeting in surprise and challenge. The seemingly harmless competition inadvertently reveals a deep, unexplained connection between the two mysterious men. The air between them suddenly becomes as tense as a bowstring. Their eyes lock, the tension silently enveloping the surrounding space. There are no words, just a silent confrontation between the two men, each holding a secret yet to be revealed. They stand still, but inside they are calculating wordlessly. The female staff member smiles awkwardly, slightly nervous as she informs the customer. This scene contrasts sharply with the tension and danger enveloping the space, where difficult decisions and dark secrets remain unexposed. His sigh seems to shatter the air around him, revealing the frustration and tension weighing heavily on his shoulders. In a world full of schemes and crime, one cannot simply overlook things, and those decisions are still waiting to be made. Despite being the first to arrive and clearly not lacking money, he voluntarily yields to someone else. Not because he is weak, but simply because trivial things are not worth occupying the mind of someone with much larger plans. He smiles smugly, thinking he has just won a small victory. But he doesn't know that what he has just been given is just a cigarette, not worth bothering about in the game the other person is quietly setting up. As soon as he steps out the door, he is blocked. A cold, black-clad man stands in his way, his tone polite but his eyes as sharp as a knife, signaling the start of an unfriendly conversation. Everything is part of his plan. He smiles faintly, extending his hand with a courteous gesture but unable to hide the calculation in his eyes. A seemingly harmless suggestion, just one cigarette, is a way for him to probe the other person's reaction. Every step, every word is carefully considered like a chess piece on a large board. The young man in a brown jacket bursts out laughing, half joking and half challenging. The response seems casual, but his eyes contain a hint of vigilance, as if he is testing the other person's reaction. In an unofficial contest, every word can be a subtle attack. The protagonist flashes a vague smile, his tone indifferent but not lacking in charm. He says he bought cigarettes just to try once, but his sharp eyes and confident demeanor make it hard to believe his words. The scene shows the man lightly waving his hand, a confident gesture, his face elated without hiding it. He steps out of the store as if everything is under his control, carrying an unpredictable and captivating attitude. He gently takes out a cigarette, his cold eye scanning it. A fleeting question, do you remember this tasteless thing? He stands watching the receding back, his tone casual but full of hidden meaning. You'll get caught smoking here. Remember to use the smoking room. A light warning, but it makes the other person pause for a moment. After 17 years of navigating the mafia world, he no longer needs anyone to teach him how to hold his head high or how to hold a cigarette to show others. This is someone you don't mess with. With just one glance, he can gauge the other person's position in the power hierarchy. 17 years have not dulled this instinct but made it sharper. The other man just stands there, saying nothing, but the pressure he emits makes the person facing him feel a chill. Experience tells him that this person is not an amateur. In that brief moment, he silently compared the other person to the monsters he had faced in a foreign land. A question flashed in his mind. Could it be that in South Korea, talented and formidable individuals are so easily encountered? He turned his head slightly, his eyes cold but with a hint of interest. After many years in the underworld, it was rare for anyone to make him turn back. But this time, things seemed to be getting interesting. As the setting sun cast a fiery glow over the room, a man in a yellow jacket silently stepped through the splattered blood. Bodies were scattered everywhere, and the stench of gunpowder and charred flesh filled the air. Without hesitation, he calmly moved forward as if this were just another ordinary day in the world of a cold-blooded killer. He stood amidst the chaos, a cigarette dangling from his lips, his cold eyes piercing through the hazy smoke. The bloodstains on the wall and the bodies at his feet only accentuated the arrogance and danger emanating from a man accustomed to living in the shadows. The sword at his waist gleamed with a silent yet absolute warning. In the blood-stained room with flickering lights, he sat down, his cold eyes surveying the pile of bodies at his feet as if inspecting a heap of garbage. A half-burned cigarette hung from the corner of his mouth, his hand clenched tightly in silence. No words were needed, his aura as a killer told it all. His eyes were as sharp as a blade as he glanced over the bodies below and whispered his assessment. The cut was just right for perfect sashimi. It was an instinct born from living too long in a blood-soaked world. He gently touched his finger to the still warm pool of blood, leaving a smudged trail in the air. No words were necessary. That single gesture was enough to confirm that he was no stranger to the stench of death. Amidst the blood-stained room, he slowly pressed the phone to his ear, his voice as calm as if he had just woken up on a peaceful morning. Yes, it's me. The simple statement made everything around him colder than the corpses at his feet. While bodies still lay scattered at his feet, he stepped out of the blood-soaked room, nonchalantly holding the phone to his ear. His voice carried a hint of irritation. What's going on? I told you not to call at this hour. The person on the other end reminded him of a meeting, but his expression remained unconcerned, as if there were no boundary between killing and everyday work. He coldly issued an order over the phone, his eyes still indifferent amidst the bloody scene. No hesitation, no wavering, just a decisive, postpone it. For him, all schedules were flexible except for the purges. On the deserted rooftop, the sniper rifle still lay, cold and precise. Under the slanting afternoon light, the body of a woman slumped on a chair, unable to react. The man who had killed Vice Chairman Kim In-soo was now targeting a new victim. No one knew who he was, all they knew was that this time, he had come for a different name. As the wine-red sunset faded, the man sat calmly, but the eyes behind him gradually darkened upon hearing the bad news. The security company that was supposed to cooperate today had lost all contact. When his men arrived, all they found were blood-soaked corpses in a dark room. A conspiracy had begun, and he was the next target. In the suffocating space filled with files and dried blood, he sat beside the body of a fallen guard. His sharp eyes scanned the deep wound, his low voice concluding, this was a lone attack carried out with just one sword. The ruthless precision indicated that the perpetrator was not only strong but also extremely skilled. He leaned forward, the ember of his cigarette casting a suggestive smile on his face. His voice was soft but firm, like a dagger thrust into the listener's heart. The killer of Vice Chairman Kim In-soo was no ordinary person, and he knew exactly where the secret meeting took place. A warning was veiled under a layer of calm, deadly intent. The wine glass lightly touched the table, producing a crisp sound amidst the tense atmosphere. The man behind it didn't flinch. With a firm tone, he reiterated the tradition of the Chonga clan, an unchanging rule: in times of crisis, all branches of the clan must unite. It wasn't an explanation, it was an unspoken command. He leaned back in his chair, looking relaxed as if everything were just a joke. The tradition of the Chonga clan was a closely guarded secret, passed down within the family, yet the other party knew and had acted first. His words seemed surprised, but at the bottom of his eyes was a cold vigilance. Because of this, he had no choice but to assign a secret task to the other party, demanding they uncover the infiltrator in absolute silence. He placed his hand on the bleeding wound of the severely injured man, his tense eyes following each faint breath, trying to find any remaining clues. As his fingers touched the blood, a familiar name burst from his mind, Blade. On the street corner, the young man in black smiled amiably, asking to borrow a cigarette. His polite demeanor hid something dangerous. He pulled out a cigarette from the pack with his left hand, revealing a scar on the back of his hand, a memory of a once ruthless individual. The person couldn't be an ordinary individual, wounds like that only appear if one has wielded a sword and survived countless battles. In the darkness, Cheon Heemin wondered, is there anyone else in the family strong enough to wield a sword that he hadn't known about? The man standing outside sneered, my family? They're useless, they can't even cut an apple properly. Cheon Heemin was taken aback. Unable to refute or deny, he silently accepted the order along with a hefty sum of money to guard the place. Light streamed in through the slightly ajar door, illuminating the floor littered with corpses and fresh blood. Cheon Heemin stepped in, his eyes cold. Although reluctant, he accepted the offer. However, his voice was firm, I'll come, but enhance the security. Cheon Heemin hung up, visibly irritated. His face twisted in annoyance at being given orders, but he ultimately acquiesced to the directive. As soon as he ended the call, he vented his frustration on the bodyguard beside him, muttering arrogantly. In his eyes, taking orders from others was an affront. While adjusting his tie, he heard a strange noise behind him. His sharp instincts immediately put him on guard. He rushed into the meeting room, unable to hide his surprise at seeing the chairman already seated there. Cheon Heemin exited the dark alley, phone in hand, reporting the situation. He confirmed he would withdraw after completing the temporary support task. Accused of betrayal, he was perplexed. His expression was a mix of disbelief and anger, as if he couldn't believe his loyalty was being questioned. Despite his initial hesitation, he walked away resolutely. 100 million was the price that made his hesitation disappear, leaving only determination to complete the contract. The call continued, this time a vague warning about an imminent danger. His face was somber and he began to feel uneasy. He ended the call with a resolute expression. Although unclear about the details, he kept his promise to explain later, his demeanor calm and cold. A stranger emerged from the shadows. His casual remark about one stick not being enough filled the air with suspicion. The game had begun. A young man in black leaned against the wall, his eyes cold. He emphasized that encountering someone with such skills near the scene couldn't be a coincidence. He had been tracking his target for a long time. Cheon Heemin laughed bitterly, holding his head in exasperation. Today was a day of humiliation, losing medicine, being followed, and being outsmarted. He gritted his teeth, half laughing and half angry, pointing out that he wasn't foolish. This was the first time he'd been played like that. Both began to close in on each other. Under the streetlights, their heavy footsteps echoed tensely. A question was about to be asked. The opponent's eyes gleamed, directly asking, "Who are you?" The atmosphere was icy, enveloping the alley. Cheon Heemin maintained a smirk. He pointed at the opponent, responding nonchalantly that he was just helping with something, nothing serious. The opponent didn't respond. Up close, his eyes flashed with caution and readiness to act. The figure in black drew both swords from his belt. His stance was fluid, ready for confrontation. There was no turning back. The swords clashed swiftly. The two faced each other inches apart. Their expressions were stern and resolute. Cheon Heemin's eyes widened, his pupils constricting. He was taken aback by the opponent's reaction and strength. His eyes opened wide, flashing with utter astonishment. In that moment, all calculations vanished, leaving only instinctive caution against a completely unexpected opponent. The cold blade tore through the air, descending like a whirlwind. He gritted his teeth, enduring the slashes that cut through his flesh, but his eyes never wavered. The real battle had begun. Both swung their swords in a fateful moment. One leapt down from the sky like a thunderbolt. The other looked up, countering with a decisive slash. The swords intersected, sparks flying in the dark night, marking the beginning of a merciless battle. He gripped the hilt tightly, his eyes tense but unwavering. Under the fluttering cloak was the determination of someone who refused to lose. He had to win this battle. The sword sliced through the wind, carrying condensed murderous intent. A slash without hesitation, enough to make the enemy hear only the whistling wind before being swept into a cold steel storm. The blade sliced past the wall, leaving a long, brutal scar. He leapt up, his survival instincts kicking in, narrowly avoiding the attack in a hair's breadth between life and death. As soon as he dodged, he counterattacked with a surprise move. Metal pipes shot out from his hand like rain, tearing through the air towards his opponent, his eyes showing no hesitation. He leaned to dodge the attack by a hair's breadth, but what fell before him left him stunned. The steel pipe had been cut. He didn't even notice when. His face stiffened, his eyes reflecting the sharpness of a silent slash. The deserted alley was filled with the remnants of the battle, but the enemy had vanished without a trace. His suspicious gaze swept through the darkness. Where did he go? Under the dim light, he bent down, panting heavily, with cold sweat soaking his forehead. His unfocused eyes looked down at something protruding from the ground. That was wriggling. Both of them charged down like two sharp blades tearing through the night, each landing a fatal blow, as if by unspoken agreement, striking at the very line between life and death. In the moment the blade was about to strike, his eyes blazed with a mixture of shocking killing intent and anger. Although he had just escaped danger, he still managed a defiant smile, the kind of smile that someone who knows they are always living on the edge of misfortune and death would make. Under the cold, blue moonlight, he stood still, his hand tightly gripping the hilt of his sword, his eyes following the figure of the strange person who was hovering in midair, a creature that didn't belong to this world. A nagging question echoed in his mind. Why did those monsters keep targeting people like him?
The assassin swooped down like a ghost, his sword clutched tightly in hand, ready to strike a fatal blow. The young man below remained oblivious, unaware that death was closing in right behind him. Recognizing the danger closing in from behind, he gritted his teeth and cursed, his hand clenching the hilt of his sword. There was no retreat. The battle had officially begun. He swooped down from above like an arrow released from a bow, swinging his sword forcefully to finish off his opponent. But the black-clad man reacted just in time, dodging the attack in an instant and sliding across the dangerous ground. The attack from above descended like a scythe of death, but the black-clad figure managed to twist his body to avoid it, then flipped backward and slid along the ground, driven by momentum. The situation was becoming increasingly tense. Blood still flowed from the wound on his chest, his body crumpled to the ground, devoid of any strength to resist. The man in the black vest turned, drew a knife, and walked away with a cold demeanor, not bothering to look back. He turned his head, his cold eyes revealing a hint of caution. His voice was not loud, but it was enough to serve as a warning. It was better for the person facing him to be cautious with their next actions. He glanced at the corpse lying motionless in the dark alley, his eyes gradually growing colder. The unusual nature of the incident made him unable to consider it just an ordinary accident. Although blood still stained his collar, he smiled defiantly. His hoarse voice rose like a warning that he was not dead yet, and revenge might have just begun. He turned away, his voice as cold as tempered steel on a dark night. For him, rules were not meant to be compromised. They were for survival and for eliminating the right targets. His eyes were as sharp as a razor, and his voice rang out like an absolute command. There would be no pursuit, no interference. Cross the boundary just once more, and the price to pay would be one's life. Lying limp in the darkness, he still couldn't understand that this time being spared was the final warning. He lowered his head, his eyes quiet but not hiding a cold undertone as he uttered a phrase, as if the debt of life and death was just the price of a cigarette. Lying in a pool of cold blood, he slightly curled his lips in a sarcastic smile, exchanging a cigarette for his life. The profit was too bitter. Under the cold moonlight, The final words echoed between the concrete walls. The value of a human life, cheap to the point of being heartbreaking. The car sped through the night, cutting across the chaos behind it. One survivor, one left behind, and a warning that might not be the last. Blood seeped through his fingers, but his eyes remained cold. The wound wasn't deep, and the mission wasn't over yet. Despite the blood still flowing, he gripped the steering wheel tightly. Pain was pushed aside. As long as he could move, he wouldn't stop. His blood-stained fingers gripped the steering wheel tightly, his eyes fixed on the road ahead for the final stretch. The revenge that had been brewing for 17 years was finally about to begin. Though the blood hadn't stopped flowing, his gaze didn't waver. The clock was ticking down, and he knew that in just 32 minutes, everything would be over. Blood splattered everywhere, his eyes wide with panic. There was no warning, no chance to resist. Death came like a blade tearing through the silence. 17 years ago, amidst the splattering blood and stifled screams, he could only watch as tragedy struck too quickly, too ruthlessly, and was beyond salvation. Amidst the blood-soaked scene, his mother's desperate scream was the last shield protecting Taeha's innocent eyes, but the memory had already etched deeply into the depths of his mind. In that tragic moment, Taeha broke free from his mother's arms, his cry of "Dad" tearing through the night, as if trying to cling to something that had already slipped away forever. In the room reeking of blood and gunpowder, the young Taeha stood frozen, witnessing his father shielding him, facing the enemy's gun. CEO Jin Sunyeok, his face smeared with blood, shouted in the midst of chaos, his final words before fate swept everything away. Under the pouring rain and the echoes of gunfire from behind, Taeha was dragged away in despair, his young heart unable to accept the permanent separation. The scream that tore through the night made both of them freeze for a brief moment, but it was enough for the horror to be deeply etched into Taeha's memory forever. The masked men retreated in chaos, leaving behind screams, bloodshed, and a child with memories that could never be erased. The young boy trembled, calling out for his mother in the pouring rain, his innocent heart not fully understanding the tragedy, but the fear had already seeped into his very bones. His mother bent down, her eyes stern as she instructed him in the pouring rain, placing all hope of survival on the young boy. She smiled one last time, hiding her despair behind gentle eyes, entrusting her child with the most sacred command: to live. In the dark moment, a brutal command rang out. The perpetrator didn't need a reason, just corpses and explosions. The young boy was stunned in the midst of the chaotic storm. The thing that dazed him the most was his mother tongue. The soldier didn't hesitate, raising the gun barrel. The cold reflection in the red lens signaled a shot that would end everything. She screamed in despair, her eyes blazing with urgency, urging the young boy to escape before it was too late. Taeha ran with his head down along the train corridor amidst the heavy rain, his heart weighed down by the shout behind him and the fear in front of him. Taeha looked back in the downpour, his panic-stricken face shouting desperately in vain, knowing that no one could answer him at that moment. With a bitter throat and tears mixed with the rain, Taeha kept running, as if he could leave the tragedy behind. In the midst of the violent storm, the train shook violently, as if it was about to sink into hell along with the secrets that had yet to be revealed. A deafening explosion tore through the rain curtain, and flames engulfed the train, completing the cold-blooded purge. Amidst the heavy rain, a lifeboat drifted quietly away from the smoldering wreckage, the only fragile life left after the night of slaughter. In the darkness of an isolated mansion, the Chung family gathered with a chilly and calculating atmosphere. Jin Juhi, the eldest daughter, with a sharp gaze behind her wine glass, was the first to raise questions about the death of director Kim In-soo. Jin Jae-song, the second son, casually joked about the chaotic private life of the deceased as if it were just a dinner topic. When the dinner table turned into a battlefield of words, Criticisms were aimed directly at private lifestyles, exposing the shameless nature of each person. Jin Jongwon, the youngest son, was not concerned with tragedy or morality. He was only interested in the remaining shares. A hand slammed on the table among those who were jesting, signaling the arrival of someone who would disrupt all compromises within this powerful family. In the quiet mansion, the secret family meeting began with a cold, silent word. No one dared to speak when the one who truly held power spoke. Jin Gyuho, the eldest son of the Chung group, leaned back behind his wine glass, his deep voice issuing commands. A mere nod was enough to silence all excuses, leaving only a cold report from the next person. Jin Chung stepped forward in the tense atmosphere, his bright smile as if this were just a casual stroll. No one knew what he was hiding beneath his harmless appearance. Under the faint light by the dock, the last survivors were dealt with without hesitation. All leads were cut off. The truth now remained only in the hands of the strong. Jin Chung smiled lightly, concealing his ruthlessness behind an innocent face. Meanwhile, Jin Gyuho's eyes remained sharp. He knew that in this family, no one acted without calculation. Blood splattered in an instant. Without warning, without hesitation, the cold shot ended the life of the person standing opposite, as if it were something that had to be done. The atmosphere in the dining room instantly froze. All three people were stunned, their panic-stricken eyes directed towards the source of the gunshot, as if they had just heard the tear of the false facade they had maintained for so long. Mr. Jin Gyuho asked in a deep voice, his cold eyes as if tearing apart the silence. The concern about the Haejeong faction could no longer be ignored. Between the flickering lights, he bowed his head, blood soaking half his face, but his lips remained tightly shut. No words of justification, only silence full of resentment and endurance. He smiled brightly, as if the blood spreading on his forehead didn't exist. His tone was light, but the language was chilling, casually mentioning the name of the person who had been dealt with like a trivial joke. The silence was shattered by Jin Gyuho's thunderous punch, without warning, without hesitation. Jin Chung's head exploded in an instant, like the most brutal sentence amidst a dinner table that was supposed to be a family gathering. Jin Gyuho pinned his son against the wall with white curtains, the blood underfoot still wet. His voice was low, but the anger in every word was as sharp as a knife. Not knowing who the culprit is, losing track of him for over 24 hours, and then reporting it to the Haejeong faction. What are you playing at? He growled, his hand clenching a broken wine glass in anger. If the chairman and Sunyeok hadn't died 17 years ago, a useless person like you wouldn't have had a chance to step into this house. Beneath his blood-soaked hair, his eyes gradually changed color. Veins bulged, and killing intent seemed to burn everything. The anger was no longer contained. The blood on his forehead was still wet, but the smile on his lips shone brightly as if nothing had happened. He raised his head, his eyes arrogant. The troublemaker would be caught within 12 hours. She curled her lips, her eyes mixed with sarcasm and indifference. Despite the bloodshed, despite the storm approaching, he remained the same, arrogant, loud, and never changing. They leaned in close, their whispered words carrying confusion and concern. Despite the eldest son always being humiliated in front of everyone, he was, after all, blood within this house. A cold gaze pierced deeply like a knife. Not because of hatred. The unexpected words made the other person pause. A different truth was being revealed. He stood in the darkness, his mouth curling into a slight smile amidst the still-wet bloodstains. They say it's something terrifying. The air sank, as if the entire house was holding its breath, waiting for the truth to surface from the depths. As he stepped out of the darkness, he stretched out his hand coldly. "Hand over your phone." The brief command was laced with pressure, causing the person opposite him to freeze, not daring to resist. He stood before the camera lens, phone in hand, and used his other hand to wipe away the blood on his face. The action was strangely calm, as if he were preparing for a call more important than the life just lost. The secretary responded curtly, her eyes calm as if everything was part of the plan. "They're ready." No further words were needed. They were just waiting for the final order to act. He smiled in satisfaction, licking the blood on his lips like someone addicted to the sensation of chaos. His voice trembled with excitement, but his eyes remained as cold as ice. "How thrilling! I wonder how he'll show up, Tilda." The car sped through the night, its tires gripping the road tightly as if carrying an impending fury. There was no more time for hesitation. The real game had begun. For 17 years, he had relentlessly hunted down every trace of Chungu, uncovering secrets and ghosts, bringing them all to light. For the fateful day, there could be no forgiveness. As combat helicopters thundered across the sky, the young woman stood steadfast on the ship's deck, her back straight, holding two short swords. Her gaze was fixed upward, as if the past was replaying the day the Salamo clan brought her back, and a bloody fate began to change course. Before the funeral ended, the seat of power had already found a new occupant. Jin Gyuho, the eldest son, smoothly took over the shares and ascended to the chairmanship, as if everything had been prearranged. Jin Gyuho did not miss the opportunity. When the crime suppression campaign failed and society descended into chaos, he quickly exploited the power vacuum to expand his influence in the shadows. To consolidate his power, Jin Gyuho did not hesitate to collaborate with other forces, including the Haejeong faction, a clandestine alliance with significant influence among the financial elite. The basement of the mansion was the site of secret meetings, a family tradition maintained since his grandfather's time. Whenever there was a crisis, everyone was required to be present. He clenched his teeth, his eyes blazing with fury piercing through the darkness. From start to finish, the rules within the family had never changed, and he wouldn't allow it to. Blood stained his clothes, but he gripped the steering wheel tightly, his anger outweighing the pain. He knew it was all just a bloody play to secure a place within the system his grandfather had built with blood and rules. His eyes flashed with suppressed anger, his parents, and even himself had once been pawns in that ruthless game of power. The security guard monitoring the control room frowned. On the surveillance screen, an unidentified car sped toward them at an alarming rate, a sign that a storm was about to hit. Head of security, Kang Min-ho frowned upon receiving the unusual signal. No one was scheduled to arrive, yet the system had triggered an alarm. Unease began to spread like gunpowder catching fire. The unidentified car hurtled toward the main gate at a dangerous speed. Before the security team could react, the threat was already at the doorstep. Security Chief Kim Gwan-soo reacted immediately as he saw the car speeding wildly toward them. His face tense, he shouted into the radio, "Raise the barriers." They couldn't let anyone breach the perimeter now. The automatic barriers rose from the ground, emitting a cold mechanical sound into the night. The main entrance was now completely blocked, ready to confront the reckless driver. Undeterred, the driver stepped hard on the gas. The engine roared, the tires screeched, and the car, like a cornered beast, charged straight at the newly raised barriers. Amidst the extravagant party, cold sarcasm cut through the air like a blade hidden in wine. They laughed and spoke, but every word was aimed at the person who had lived in weakness. In their eyes, calculation was a useless trait for the defeated. In the dark cockpit, gloved hands gripped the safety belt tightly. No words were needed. That simple action spoke volumes. He was ready to take on an entire family. The sound of the collision shattered the night. The car crashed into the steel barricade without hesitation, as if the body was merely a tool for the rage screaming within. In the silent darkness, steel glinted under a cold hand. He drew his knife without hesitation, as if ready to sever everything with a single stroke. The car crashed into the barricade, its body shattering with the sound of breaking metal. There was no turning back. The intruder had chosen the most violent way to make their entrance. The headlights swept across, accompanied by the roar of the engine, causing the bodyguards to look up in shock. Someone had charged into the lion's den, sending a clear and singular message. Like a blade piercing through the veil of night, he charged into the encirclement. Every strike was a cold declaration, no warning, no mercy. In the moment the blood-stained blade flashed, his eyes gleamed like cold steel. The one who was once pushed aside had returned with uncontainable fury. The crashing sound echoed through the room, shaking its very foundations. In the midst of a peaceful banquet, panic suddenly descended upon them, but they had no idea who the storm that had just arrived was. A strange noise coming from the main gate froze the atmosphere in the room. The members of the family stopped eating, their suspicious eyes converging on the direction from which danger was approaching. The man chuckled softly, as if he had just realized something. His eyes narrowed with amusement. He knew very well who was arriving. Jin Chung remained seated, his eyes never leaving his wine glass. His voice was calm, but it sent a chill down the spines of everyone at the table. He knew exactly who had just arrived and had no intention of stopping them. The man was taken aback, his lips trembling as if he couldn't believe what he had just heard. Panic was evident on his face. He had no idea that the storm had truly arrived at the doorstep. The entire hall erupted into chaos in an instant. Jin Chung and the members of the Jin family were caught off guard, surrounded by strangers with guns pointed directly at them. The butler was silenced before he could even speak. The power they once held was now nothing more than a shadow. Jin Sina jumped up in panic, her voice trembling as she struggled to believe her eyes. Her eyes were wide with fear, her hand raised instinctively as if to protect herself from the sudden threat that had descended upon them in the middle of what seemed like a peaceful banquet. Jin Gyuho roared with anger, unable to accept that he was being betrayed by his own bodyguards. He stood up abruptly, his eyes filled with shock and rage, shouting out in the midst of the chaos that had engulfed the dining room. Jin Gyuho sat silently at the dinner table, his back straight, his cold eyes fixed on the guns pointed at his family members. Without needing to turn around, he controlled the situation, a predator watching its prey struggle in vain. The air was thick with tension, all eyes on the man who once held absolute power. Jin Gyuho clenched his jaw, his eyes burning with anger and resentment as he stared at Jin Chung, the one who was betraying him right before his eyes. His anger was boiling over, but he remained calm, unable to believe that the younger brother he had once supported would dare to turn against him in front of the entire family. Jin Chung smiled arrogantly, his eyes gleaming with mockery as he looked straight at Jin Gyuho. His voice was light, but every word cut deep into the other man's heart, a fatal blow delivered not with a gun, but with the truth that everyone had been avoiding. You knew this would happen sooner or later. Jin Chung's smile was gone, replaced by a cold, piercing gaze that weighed heavily on Jin Gyuho like an undeniable verdict. He looked straight at his cousin, his voice low and deadly. The reason you hate me, isn't it because you're afraid of losing that seat, afraid that one day you'll end up like our grandfather, replaced, forgotten? He didn't need to shout. Every word was enough to leave the other man speechless. The bodyguards immediately reacted when they spotted Taeha breaking into the villa grounds. Panicked shouts erupted. "We're under attack. Get your weapons." Despite being alone, Taeha threw the entire security system into chaos. His return wasn't for negotiations, but the beginning of a bloody battle. Jang Myung slammed his fist on the table, standing up abruptly with a tense and visibly shaken expression. He shouted into the growing chaos, "Jin Chung, have you gone mad?" Jin Chung's presence was like a knife stabbing into the trust and power they had built over the years. The room was filled with cries of panic. One of the high-ranking members, Choi Di-hyun, jumped up, unable to believe his eyes as Jin Chung had his men point guns at the dinner table. His voice trembled with anger and fear. "What are you doing, Jin Chung? How dare you point guns at people in this house?" No one expected the so-called family to fall apart so quickly. Jin Chung shrugged, feigning innocence with a bewildered expression, as if he were an outsider in the chaos. With an innocent gaze and a light tone, he said, "Me. I didn't do anything. But everyone knew it was his pretended naivety that made the atmosphere even more suffocating. In the chaos, Yu Yi-guk slammed the table and stood up, shouting furiously, "Are you kidding me, you bastard?" Next to him, Han Du-yan also lost his composure, yelling at the armed men, "Are you crazy? Put your guns down." 2 generations, 2 states of panic, but sharing the same fear, they all understood that this power game had gone too far. Kwan Yura turned her head, giving Moon Yeomin a cold, suspicious stare. In the midst of the conflict and gunfire, she cut straight to the question. "Moon Yeomin, are you siding with Jin Chung?" This inquiry was enough to expose the wavering loyalty at the hypocritical dinner table. Moon Yeomin bowed his head, his calm and resolute voice saying, "I'm sorry, young lady." As a close bodyguard to Jin Juhi, the eldest daughter, he chose to betray his master. In this moment, his loyalty was no longer with the Jin family, but with the one who truly held the power of life and death, Jin Chung. Haejeong Junhyuk blew bubbles with his gum, his lazy tone laced with sarcasm. "You should have raised our pay earlier." As a bodyguard to Jin Jongwon, the 4th son, his indifferent and bored attitude showed his lack of interest in loyalty. To him, it was all just a job, and a job should be paid fairly. Moon Dane, Jin Chung's personal bodyguard, remained cold and ruthless. She didn't need to speak or show her stance. A single piercing glance was enough to affirm that she was there not to protect the family, but to end it. Jin Myung, the father and head of the family, sat silently in the face of betrayal from those he trusted most. His heavy, disappointed voice carried deep frustration, not because he was betrayed, but because the betrayers were his own flesh and blood, whom he had nurtured. Jin Myung raised his head, his eyes blazing with intensity as he enunciated each word. He wasn't asking out of doubt. He was confirming the end of the father-son relationship he had cherished his whole life. Betrayal was no longer a hypothesis, it was a knife to the throat. The mention of Baek Junsu's name plunged the room into silence. Jin Myung didn't need to turn around to know the grey-haired old man was standing there. The man, once his right hand, now appeared behind him like the final confirmation of the betrayal. Baek Junsu's cold, steel-like eyes and calm voice filled the turbulent room. "I'm not protecting the chairman," he declared, each word heavy as a blow to the remaining fragile trust. "I'm protecting Chungu. Not a person, but an ideal. Not blood, but the values that built this empire." Jin Jae-song shouted, slamming his hand on the chair, his enraged eyes scanning the betrayers. "Snap out of it, you bastards. Do you think you're living in the Joseon era?" His anger burst forth in sharp questions. "Do you think you'll be given power in Chungu this way?" In an instant, the once arrogant man was left with nothing but despair and panic. Jin Jae-song panicked, shouting, "Committee," as a cold gun barrel pressed against his forehead. In that brief moment, power, schemes, and status all vanished, leaving only pure fear in the desperate eyes of a man plummeting from glory. A shrill scream filled the room as Haejeong Junhyuk coldly pulled the trigger. The bullet pierced the air, blood splattering everywhere. Jin Jongwon froze, collapsing in the chaos. A smirk still lingered on Junhyuk's lips, as if this was just a small part of the cold-blooded negotiation he had planned long ago. Jin Juhi was stunned, her whole body trembling as she watched her brother being shot right in front of her. Jin Jae-song, pale-faced, screamed in despair, calling out for Park Jun-ho like a drowning man clinging to a straw. But everything was beyond control. Guns were pointed at them, the betrayal was set in motion, and the mastermind showed no hesitation. Gunshots echoed through the air, tearing apart the atmosphere, blood splattering across the ceiling and walls. Cries of pain and panic never ceased. In that moment, the family gathering had turned into hell. Jin Chung smiled calmly, as if everything was within his calculations. Moon Dane silently wiped his hand with a white cloth, her eyes unruffled. In the blood-stained and smoke-filled room, only the two of them remained composed, as if they had just finished an ordinary dinner party. From under the blood-stained table, a figure quietly emerged. The sound of footsteps was light but decisive, bringing with it the tense air compressed in the deadly room. Jin Chung stepped out of the shadows, facing the cold gaze of the middle-aged man. No shots were fired, no words were spoken, yet the truth was laid bare. The man had always known, he just couldn't stop today's arrival. Park Jun-ho silently took back the gun from Jin Chung. As Jin Chung casually recounted the family tragedy like a form of entertainment, a faint smile appeared on his lips, revealing a hint of mockery. Every word he spoke stripped away the mask of morality the family had worn, exposing the rot beneath their lavish parties. Jin Yijun gritted his teeth, his angry eyes blazing, finally voicing the words he had buried for years. He had always sensed that Jin Chung was behind every misfortune, and that's why he had tried to keep his distance. But now, with the truth revealed, regret and hatred mingled in the wrinkles on his face. Jin Chung smiled coldly, his finger lightly shaking the gun like a harmless toy. His eyes sparkled with contempt as he accused. It was Jin Yijun who had ordered the murder of his grandfather and brother. In the tension-filled room, those words cut like a knife into the family's past. Jin Chung pointed the gun at Jin Yijun's forehead, his cold eyes piercing through the past. He gritted his teeth, recalling the fateful day 17 years ago, the unjust deployment to the Gulf of Aden, where his loved ones didn't deserve to die. He didn't need evidence. In his heart, he had the answer. Jin Yijun was the one who had sent them to their deaths under the guise of a special mission. Jin Yijun screamed, the gun pressed against his forehead like a desperate man, his face distorted by ambition and fear. He didn't deny it, nor did he repent. To him, it was all just a game of power. If Chairman Sunyeok had left the position to his son, then people like him would never have had a standing. The raw truth was revealed in his scream. Betrayal was a matter of survival. Jin Chung gritted his teeth, pressing the gun against the man he once called father, his eyes burning with fury. His voice was suppressed, trembling with resentment. "Why, you designated me as your successor, and yet—" The sentence was left unfinished, his hand tightening around the gun, as if he wanted to crush the years of deception and betrayal. This was no longer a purge, but a sentence for the lies hidden behind the guise of family ties. As Jin Chung leaned in close, the eyes of the former family head flashed with fear. Cold sweat broke out, reflecting the light from the ceiling like a cut straight into his crumbling pride. No excuse could cover the truth anymore. This wasn't a dialogue. It was the final verdict from the son he had once abandoned. Jin Chung stared straight into his eyes, the cold light reflecting in his murderous pupils. His whispered voice cut deep into the heart. "Because I knew that if I gave you the position of heir, my death would come right after." There was no doubt between them. There had never been trust, only deadly games waiting to erupt. Jin Chung sneered, the gun still pressed against the traitor's forehead. "That's right," he admitted, his voice as calm as if he were discussing trivial matters. "But now that you've said it yourself, I feel quite annoyed." In the space filled with the smell of gunpowder and blood, his anger didn't erupt in a scream. It was the chilling calmness of a man who had prepared for this scene for 17 years. His face was drenched in sweat, but Jin Sunyeok's eyes remained defiant as he stared into the gun barrel, his voice cold. "Even if you kill me right here, you'll never sit in the chairman's seat." His eyes no longer held fear, but a steely conviction in a power that had been predetermined long ago, far beyond the recklessness of the man before him. Jin Chung chuckled dryly, spinning the gun as if it were a toy. The light from above highlighted the frightening nonchalance on his face. "Because," he tilted his head slightly, a faint smile on his lips. "Ah, I know." The air seemed to thicken, and Jin Sunyeok felt suffocated by the vague response, more so than by the gun barrel moments before. Jin Chung tilted his head further, his cold smile widening. He quoted the committee's clause with a smug tone. "Transferring power through a military or political coup is not recognized. That's the law of the committee, isn't it?" His words were like a sharp blade, cutting away the last remnants of illusion in Jin Sunyeok's mind. Park Junho walked slowly forward, his eyes as cold as forged steel. His voice was low and sharp, like a knife circling his opponent's neck. "But what should I do now?" Without a weapon in hand, just his footsteps and gaze made the air heavy and suffocating. He froze upon hearing that the riotous group outside wasn't his own. Confusion and fear mingled in his eyes as he stuttered. "What, then? Who's behind it?" The confidence he had just mustered was instantly extinguished by a creeping doubt that sent a chill down his spine. Park Junho pulled the trigger coldly, his eyes still holding a calm smile as if stating the obvious. He declared, "There's still someone coming, a noble figure who's been waiting for 17 years, someone who will cover up everything." A single shot ended it all, blood splattering everywhere, marking the end for the one who dared challenge his power. A man charged forward amidst the gunfire, shouting in anger, gripping his gun and firing repeatedly. His eyes blazed with fury, his screams tearing through the air as if avenging a fallen comrade. This was no longer a mission, it was a purge. The man who had charged forward now lay mortally wounded. The blade had sliced across his body, blood splattering under the cold blue light. His face contorted in pain, the gun slipped from his hand, and his legs buckled. His teammates behind him continued to charge forward, but the price of their recklessness was clear, a life buried in the midst of a merciless massacre. The assassin wasn't armed with a gun, but every step he took sent shockwaves through the formation. One man had already fallen, blood soaking the grass. Amidst the chaotic screams, the bodyguards hastily closed in, the lights casting a shadow of a man flipping through the air like a wild beast. Despite lacking long-range weapons, his aura of violence sent everyone into a panic. The main force of the Chungu group was its security team, comprising elite individuals with abilities at least equivalent to those of a CEO. The bodyguards serving the family directly played a crucial role in maintaining power and internal order. In the scene, a figure rushed toward the front line, their cold gaze reflecting an unshakable determination. A towering man with a shaved head stood amidst the grey sky, his gaze cold and confident. The combat device on his finger glowed blue, as if he were ready to plunge into a deadly battle. In his mind, there was only one thought: they're just a group slightly stronger than that guy years ago. As if the past meant nothing compared to the storm he was about to unleash. In a heart-stopping moment on the courtyard floor, all Chungu bodyguards aimed their guns at a single target. But in an instant, a green light flashed, accompanied by the sound of rushing wind. The protagonist, with extraordinary agility, had vanished from his original position. Surprise spread across the faces of those surrounding him. They were too slow to react, left with only footprints and a stunned, echoing in the tense air. A swift massacre was about to begin. With a cold gaze and unwavering determination, the young man with blue-tinged black hair charged forward like a gust of wind. "Then there's no problem," he declared resolutely, as if ending all hesitation. He didn't need a gun, just his will and speed, and in that moment no one dared stand in his way. This was the beginning of an overwhelmingly one-sided battle. He moved too fast for the naked eye to follow. His path was a blur of white, weaving through the rain of bullets. The sounds of gunfire intertwined with the whistling wind, creating a chaotic scene, yet within that chaos lay an unstoppable force. He appeared behind his opponent like a shadow, his movements decisive and cold. The strike released a burst of blue energy like thunder, sending his opponent flying before they could react. His eyes were icy, unwavering, a testament to his mastery and the killing intent honed through countless battles. One of Chungu's men panicked, shouting, "No, don't shoot!" His voice trembled as he realized his teammate was being held hostage by the intruder. The gunman in front, still tense and unaware of the situation, kept his gun trained on both. The air was taut, ready to snap at the slightest misstep. Ignoring the warning, one of them pulled the trigger. The bullets flew toward their target, but the intruder swiftly turned, using the hostage as a shield. A shot hit the hostage's back, causing him to scream in pain as blood splattered. Amidst the chaos, the attacker remained calm, turning to deliver a powerful kick that sent the shooter flying, leaving the team stunned and frightened. A soldier attempted to fire again, but was struck down before he could pull the trigger. His eyes rolled back, his body thrown backward by an immense force, the gun slipping from his hand, and his gun-holding arm severed, blood gushing out. Horror was etched on his face. He hadn't reacted in time, hadn't understood what was happening. The young man darted away like a whirlwind, his figure almost becoming a shadow in the night. Each swing of his blade was a flash of light, blood splattering everywhere. The 6 surrounding bodyguards were taken down in an instant. His eyes were icy, his body moving like lightning, leaving behind only fallen bodies and an air thick with the stench of blood. A ruthless, precise, and unhesitating massacre. 2 bodyguards panicked, turning around in horror at the carnage before them. One stuttered, "Evacuate the chairman first." The other immediately responded, "Yes." Without hesitation, they turned to flee in chaos, knowing that if they were a second late, the consequences would be irreparable. The battlefield had lost control. Amidst the darkness, a cold light flashed as the young man swung his sword in a gleaming arc. The powerful motion created a crescent-shaped slash that tore through the air, making the ground seem to tremble. His face was as cold as ice, unwavering, his eyes fixed on the target ahead. eliminating all who stood in his way. One of the bodyguards, turning to flee, was suddenly pierced from behind by a cold blade. The sound of metal clashing rang out, sparks flying from the impact. He widened his eyes, unable to scream, his body freezing, his hands instinctively clutching his chest, his terrified gaze gradually fading into numbness. The strike was swift, decisive, leaving no room for hesitation. The man wearing sunglasses coldly took a drag on his cigarette, the reflection on the lenses masking his sharp eyes. He gritted his teeth, his voice filled with disdain and anger. "What are you people doing, you idiots? Can't you handle it quietly? Now they're all pouring in." The air around him seemed to thicken, revealing that he was more than just a bystander. The three heads of Chunggu security appeared simultaneously. Kim Il-seok sneered in disdain, mocking his subordinates for their incompetence. Kim Cheolsu clenched his fist coldly, ready to act. Yang Chulho drew his gun, his eyes narrowing in suspicion as he saw the chaos was caused by a single person. The air grew suffocating. In the blink of an eye, 2 Chunggu agents fell in a pool of blood. The young man moved like a whirlwind, his eyes cold, his blood-stained sword never slowing. Each move was a killing blow. This wasn't a fight, it was an execution. While others were still jeering, one of the 3 heads of Chunggu security stepped forward coldly to the front line. No orders were needed, no discussion, just a personal decision to end it all. Despite having taken down numerous bodyguards, a sudden pain hit him, making him clench his teeth in endurance. His body began to react, but his gaze remained unwavering. The old wound tore open again, blood soaking through his clothes, a searing pain like fire, but he merely furrowed his brow, his back still straight, his hand still gripping the hilt of his dagger tightly. The battle was far from over. Just as he turned, a massive fist like a sledgehammer came crashing down, the wind whipping past his ear, his reflexes acting swiftly, but his eyes still shone bright. He knew his true opponent had just entered the fray. He charged forward like a living bullet, crushing the ground beneath his feet, the force of his attack surging like a torrent. This assault was not just about brute strength, but a true declaration of war. Struggling to get back to his feet after the terrifying collision, he clenched the hilt of his dagger, his eyes cold and unyielding, despite the blood still seeping from his side. His fighting spirit remained unwavering. He raised his head, his piercing gaze locking onto his opponent. His deep voice echoed through the tense night air, a warning from someone who would not tolerate any intrusion into this sacred ground. The guard charged down like a meteor hurtling to earth, unleashing all his strength into the punch. But the young man stood firm, his head held high, his eyes unflinching and fearless, a moment of calm before the storm. The guard roared through the air, enraged by the prolonged chaos. His body hurtled forward like an arrow, carrying with it a deadly aura that threatened to crush everything in its path. Yet his opponent remained unmoved. Despite his unhealed wounds, the young man's eyes remained cold and resolute. The dagger clenched tightly in his hand was a declaration of war. This was no time to worry about physical strength, but the moment of reckoning. Before the guard could throw his punch, his opponent vanished from sight. A fleeting look of confusion crossed his face. He had been outmaneuvered in an instant. The sound of rushing wind filled the air. The 2 team leaders had barely reacted when they felt the deadly aura closing in. Both turned their heads simultaneously, their faces frozen in shock. The enemy had closed in too quickly. Without giving them a chance to react, he swung his arm like lightning, hurling his dagger through the air, slicing towards its target with a chilling aura. Enraged by the sudden attack, Kim Il-seok gritted his teeth, his eyes blazing with fury, drawing his baton and charging forward like a predator. Behind him, his teammates were ready to join the fight. Taking advantage of the heavy rain that obscured visibility, he charged forward like lightning, delivering a precise kick to the enemy's chest, sending all 3 of them flying like broken puppets, unable to react before they collapsed in a daze. The man had barely understood what was happening when a flash of steel appeared behind him, a short sword poised to strike, completely catching him off guard. The dagger sliced through the air in an instant, blood splattering everywhere. The young man's face remained expressionless, his eyes as cold as the blade in his hand, a fatal strike, with no unnecessary motion. In the silent night, the young man walked slowly towards the house, as if he had just completed a trivial task. Behind him lay the bodies of the fallen, blood staining the stone floor, the remnants of a merciless massacre. The young man's cold gaze lingered on the blood-stained dagger lying quietly on the threshold. The blood had not yet dried, but he had let go long ago, a sign that he no longer needed a weapon to finish things. The young man bent down to pick up the blood-soaked dagger, as if reclaiming a lost memory. His shadow stretched out across the threshold, carrying with it the stillness before the storm that awaited behind the door. The young man stood still in the courtyard, the moonlight reflecting off the blood-stained blade. Later than I expected, he thought to himself, then his cold gaze swept around. This silence is too unusual. The air seemed to freeze, signaling the approach of an impending storm. He stood motionless before the closed door. All traces had been erased, leaving only a chilling question echoing in his mind. How did they escape without him noticing? He slipped inside quietly, his eyes scanning the darkness swiftly. The dagger in his hand was clenched tightly, a clear sign. This time he had not come to talk. Blood still fresh, bodies scattered throughout the room. He stepped inside, dual daggers in hand, and a nonchalant voice echoed from within. "Oh, you're here." As if the massacre was just a routine reception. In the room filled with the stench of blood, he sat with one leg crossed over the other, as if he had just finished a dinner party. The gun still rested on his thigh, a faint smile on his lips. "Tough on you, take a break." The words were light, but the atmosphere was suffocatingly cold. In the room stained with blood, he stood frozen. His eyes remained cold, but his voice cracked out like a suppressed sigh. What the hell is going on here? It wasn't fear, it was because this wasn't part of the script he had prepared. Jin Jae-sung's lifeless body lay in a pool of blood, his eyes closed, still bearing a look of shock. No need to check, the man who once held immense power was now just a cold corpse. Jin Juhi's small body curled up in a pool of blood, her eyes tightly shut, her hand still raised as if protecting something. No breath, no hope, just an eerie silence. Jin Jongwon's forehead was smeared with blood, his eyes half closed, as if he couldn't believe what had happened. A sudden massacre, an unexpected end. Chairman Jin Gyuho, the man who once commanded an empire, now lay with his head tilted back, blood flowing from his forehead down to his tie. His eyes were wide open, as if unwilling to accept, as if he still wanted to say something, but it was too late. Darkness consumed his life in the blood-soaked, silent hall. As the members of the Jin family fell one by one in a chilling silence, Jin Chung, the eldest son of Chairman Jin Gyuho, suddenly appeared. With a cold expression, he mocked Taeha, the sole survivor, and hinted at the grudge from years ago. Taeha's eyes now revealed a mix of caution and suppressed anger. It seemed both knew the real battle was only just beginning. Jin Chung sneered, his sharp gaze sweeping over his opponent. His cold words hung in the air, unreserved. Power and challenge erupted in every sentence. Taeha stood still, his cold gaze piercing through the night. The wind rustled his hair, carrying with it the breath of defiance. He was ready to face any challenge, unwavering. Under the faint light of the night, Jin Chung stood tall, a confident smile on his lips. Under the cold light of the room, Jin Chung stood upright, his voice calm but sharp as a blade. "If you don't want to sit, stand and listen," he said coldly, his eyes never leaving his opponent. Blood stained the floor, the air thick with the stench of death. The dining table was still set, a glass of wine silently witnessing the tense atmosphere. "It won't take long," he concluded, his tone laced with an unavoidable threat. In the dim light of the room, Jin Chung stood tall, a mysterious smile on his lips as he gazed forward. "Do you remember 17 years ago?" he asked, his eyes cold and probing, as if digging into the past. His hand gripped his weapon tightly, continuing, "You were saved by the Italian mafia when you were about to die." His words echoed like a reminder, carrying the weight of history and unrevealed secrets. Under the faint light of the room, Jin Chung turned his back, his demeanor calm but resolute. The woman beside him spoke up, actually at that time, then hesitated. Darkness surrounded them, the air tense like the calm before a storm. "The helicopter is ready," she continued, her voice clear, signaling an impending turning point. In the dim light of the room, the woman with deep purple hair turned around, her worried eyes visible. "Let's go, this place is too dangerous," she urged, her voice hurried but firm. It seemed she sensed the threat lurking in the shadows. Under the dim light of the enclosed room, Jin Chung snapped irritably, his voice filled with frustration. Moon Dane, his loyal bodyguard, stood silently beside him, her sharp eyes never leaving her master. She knew Jin Chung's temper. Once he was angry, no one dared to interrupt. This tense conversation was just the beginning of the upcoming turmoil. Taeha stood in the silent room, the faint light reflecting off the two sharp blades in his hand. Blood stained the floor, the bodies of his enemies motionless, a sign of a perfect ambush. His eyes were cold, ready for the next step in his perilous journey. Taeha gazed straight ahead, his eyes as sharp as a knife, unshaken despite the blood still on his hands. Behind his refined exterior was a predator, always ready to strike down anyone who stood in his way. He knew that tonight was just the beginning of a more brutal battle. The female bodyguard froze, the unfamiliar voice sending a chill down her spine. "That voice," she muttered, her sharp eyes scanning the dark room. Beside her, Jin Chung frowned, responding with a questioning, "Ha!" his hand tightening, ready to face the looming danger. Taeha's hand clenched the sword tightly, his voice trembling. "The one who killed my family 17 years ago." His eyes blazed with hatred, the darkness around him merging with the rage ready to erupt. The moment of revenge had finally arrived. The armored warrior growled, "Damn it, this is infuriating," as he pressed his foot against the enemy pinned beneath him. The dim light in the narrow room reflected the tension, signaling an unresolved confrontation. In the thick darkness, the mysterious soldier stood firm with a cold gaze behind his mask. With a gun in hand, he issued a cold command. "I told you to detonate it after I eliminate everyone." The dim light cast upon his stunned face, his eyes wide with surprise. "Jin Chung," his voice trembled, carrying doubt and pain. "Is that you?" Jin Chung stood silently beside the cold female bodyguard. Her eyes were as sharp as a knife, always on guard, while his figure exuded mystery and power. The silence between them was like a warning, preparing for an impending tense confrontation. Under the dim light, he adjusted his tie, a forced smile on his lips. "Good grief, what should I say?" His voice was filled with confusion, masking the underlying tension. An unexpected situation had arisen, forcing him to face a truth he was unprepared for. Under the cold light, his smile became menacing, his eyes gleaming with threat. "Are you going to continue speaking so intimately?" His voice was cold, full of lethal intent. "Be careful, I'll make you wish you were dead." The tension escalated, the air thick with unyielding confrontation. In the dark gloom, Taeha gripped the sharp knife tightly, his eyes determined and challenging. "Bring it on," his voice rang out, resolute and confident. "I'm here to do just that." The atmosphere became as taut as a bowstring, ready for a decisive confrontation between life and death. The room was still stained with blood when Jin Chung suddenly erupted in anger over the way they addressed each other. He couldn't tolerate being treated without proper respect, even when the person across from him had single-handedly taken down his entire team of bodyguards. Amidst the chaos, Taeha's eyes locked intensely, pausing for a moment to piece together the fragments of his past that had been forgotten for 17 years. Jin Chung was far from foolish. He knew Taeha was alive, aware of the blood-soaked past in Salerno. But his silence for 17 years was the most puzzling part. Taeha's mind raced. If Jin Chung had known everything, why had he waited exactly 17 years to act? Everything seemed too coincidental, or was it all orchestrated from the start? No more hiding or pretending. Jin Chung gave the order to open fire. The game had officially begun. They didn't want to call it a coup. They just needed to act swiftly enough that no one would suspect a thing. They fabricated a reason, claiming Taeha was the one who sparked the bloodshed, to legitimize their final move to take the chairman's seat. The former subordinate now sneered, calling Taeha Old Master, a jab that twisted into the buried past. Taeha's eyes froze, his hand tightening around the hilt of his sword. While the past could be insulted, the blood spilled today would reclaim honor. The madman laughed as he pulled the trigger, the bullet whizzing toward the ceiling, a shot that declared war, opening the bloody dance of the night. Without hesitation, Taeha drew his sword, slicing through the bullet's path. a reflex as sharp as a predator counterattacking with primal instinct. The sword struck the bullet, sparks flying as the sound pierced the air. In that cold, sharp gaze, there was no room for error. The bullet fell to the ground, the smile on the man's face freezing. The counterattack had begun, swift, precise, and merciless. A kick launched like a storm, tearing through the distance. Taeha gripped his sword tightly, absorbing the powerful blow from the enemy who had just appeared. There was no room for error. Taeha gritted his teeth, his eyes blazing as he recognized the man before him, someone who had also been part of the tragedy years ago. The pieces were slowly falling into place. The man turned, his eyes arrogant, as he introduced himself. "I am Park Junho." His greeting was not a gesture of goodwill, it was a signal to begin a battle to the death. Taeha sprang forward like an arrow released from a bow, the sound of his kick echoing like a declaration of war. He was ready to face his enemy. Taeha slid across the floor like a whirlwind, his sword slicing through the air, leaving a sharp trail of light. The first counterattack had begun. Bullets whizzed through the air as the opponent fired wildly, but Taeha glided like a ghost. One misstep would be fatal. The assassin fired continuously, laughing mockingly at Taeha's speed, as if watching a show. But he didn't know that the game was only just beginning. Park Junho launched a straight kick, like an axe blow Taeha dodged by a hair's breadth. The clash had now surpassed the boundaries of an ordinary fight. Taeha's eyes widened. The lethal intent had been too real, too close. Unable to counterattack in time, he could only face the enemy's power like an oncoming flood. Park Junho smiled confidently, throwing a punch while taunting. "Is being flexible your secret?" In his eyes, the fight was only just beginning. Neither backed down. Park Junho charged with a sweeping kick, while Taeha raised his sword to block. Strength met speed, and the two clashed in a burst of explosive energy like lightning. Taeha gritted his teeth, enduring the relentless pressure, silently acknowledging that the elite warriors of Chenggu were unlike anyone else, as if they belonged to a completely different league. Taeha suffered a deep gash on his hip, something that would never have happened before. Normally, he could have taken down everyone in an instant, not giving them a chance to react. But this time, everything was different. Jin Chung smiled smugly, unaware that he was gradually letting his guard down. With security team leader Baek Junsu absent, this was a rare opportunity to turn the tables. Taeha's eyes sharpened like a blade, quickly analyzing the enemy's formation. If the woman was Moon Dane, then Jin Chung was left with only 3 bodyguards. But what about the 4 people in the meeting room? A sense of unease crept into his thoughts. Park Junho charged like a wild beast, his fists clenched, eyes blazing. Taeha turned, feeling the lethal intent closing in. The attack this time was not a warning, but a finishing blow. In that moment of deadly intent, Taeha's reflection appeared in the enemy's eyes, cold, unyielding. A formidable opponent, and a nightmare that they were about to face. Another figure swooped down from above like a sword slicing through the sky. A cold face hid behind a pair of glasses, the blade reflecting a determination to kill. The battle had officially spiraled out of control. The sword descended like a lightning strike, piercing straight through the opponent's chest. There was not a single unnecessary movement, not a hint of hesitation. The finishing blow of a professional assassin had been executed. After the swift and decisive strike, the assassin adjusted his glasses with a look of discomfort. Beside him, Park Junho clenched his fist. The game had only just begun. Blood seeped from his side, but Taeha's gaze remained unshaken. He gripped his sword tightly. The only opponent left stood before him. The assassin adjusted his glasses, calmly pointing out a weakness in combat, the light. But Park Junho just smiled confidently, his hand clenching into a fist. If it were that easy, I would have finished it already. Their opponent was Taeha, and he was not someone to be underestimated. The platinum-haired assassin bared his teeth in a smile, loading his gun with a challenging glint. How much would I get if I killed him? His voice rang out like a joke, but the barrel of the gun was not joking. The first bullet fired, followed by a series of merciless reflexes. Taeha dodged, firing back in response. There was no room for threats, only survival amidst the hail of bullets. One man collapsed in a pool of blood. Jin Chung and his female bodyguard watched from a distance, calmly analyzing. Shooting from afar, close combat when he gets close, it's chaotic, isn't it? The battle with Taeha was not just about strength, it was about overturning every old strategy. Jin Chung smiled sinisterly, his eyes full of confidence. They were trained from the start just to catch you. Your speed, world-class, enough to catch the attention of Interpol. But beneath his words lay a trap that had long been set. Taeha gripped the handle of his knife tightly, his face tense with anger. He had just heard a ruthless plan. The mastermind behind the scenes wanted to kill him with a bomb, but chose to stage a fight, just enough, to turn himself into a hero in the public eye. A drama constructed with blood and lies. Two figures faced off in the dim yellow light. Park Junho clenched his steel fist, taking deliberate steps forward like a hunting beast. But facing him was Taeha, his hands gripping a pair of knives, his eyes steadfast without a hint of hesitation. The tension was like the calm before a storm, waiting for a single move to erupt. No matter how fast Taeha was, he had now fallen within the sights of three guns. The sneering smile of the silver-haired assassin seemed to signal a ruthless checkmate. Taeha was cornered, where speed alone was not enough to survive. The cold assassin stepped forward, gun pointed at Taeha, speaking as if victory was already assured. "We just need to make sure you can't move." But Taeha's eyes remained unshaken. Beneath his calm exterior, the blade in his hand waited for the perfect moment to counterattack. The assassin roared, throwing a punch with all his might. His eyes were filled with a killing intent, determined to take down Taeha in one strike. Taeha's expression tensed, his eyes widened, his heart constricting in a moment of danger. He hadn't expected the assassin to be so reckless and launch a direct attack. But in the depths of his eyes, there was no fear, only the awakening of his fighting instincts. Jin Chung smiled enigmatically, his eyes half praising, half probing. "Well done, Taeha." The praise was laced with hidden meaning, as if everything was part of a plan that only he knew. Taeha had survived, but he had also stepped deeper into a game he couldn't escape. The wall crumbled under the punch like a storm. Taeha was no longer holding back. All calculations, all pretenses were shattered in this violent moment. This was no longer a mission, but a clear declaration of war from someone who was once hunted. Taeha recalled 4 years ago. A familiar voice echoed in his chaotic memories. A woman with cold eyes and sharp questioning. "Jin Taeha, what are you trying to do?" To her, Taeha's plan was absurd, but to Taeha at that time, it was the start of a path he couldn't turn back from. A horrific scene painted in blood, corpses nailed to the wall, the room drenched in red. The blonde man standing before this scene merely barked coldly. "I told you to deal with the traitor, not to create art." The punishment had far exceeded its target, revealing the loss of control among the assassins and the ruthless atmosphere surrounding the organization. The bloody scene was too much for them to bear. The brown-haired woman cursed under her breath and vomited a glittering rainbow, a humorously sarcastic reaction. Those behind her couldn't hide their horror either. The interplay between violence and dark comedy left the audience both chilled and forcing an awkward laugh. A voice from behind spoke up, filled with resignation. "How many times has this happened?" Before them lay a blood-soaked scene, with traces of violence on the chairs and carpet. "You could have handled it quietly, at your own pace." The words were a gentle rebuke, tinged with helplessness, as if they had witnessed such chaotic works many times before. Two guards stood listlessly among the stacked containers, sunlight streaming down from the clear sky. With vacant expressions and bulging bellies, they were completely off guard. Still holding their guns, their lazy postures revealed they had not anticipated the storm quietly approaching. The guard bent down, patting the boy's shoulder as if soothing a living commodity. But his shifty eyes and twisted smile couldn't hide his true nature. They didn't consider the boy human. Taeha stood straight, his back rigid and his gaze cold. But beneath the silence, anger had begun to smolder. The woman spoke up, her eyes as sharp as a blade. Lorenzo didn't treat you poorly, so I understand why you feel betrayed. But her tone wasn't comforting. It was a warning. If you keep killing people so brazenly, you'll only make more enemies. She turned to leave, her cold voice echoing back. For your master, for the Salerno family, never cause such chaos again. The words were both a warning and an unchallengeable reprimand. Taeha lowered his head in silence. His eyes sank into an endless white space, not quite submission, but restraint. A spark of anger quietly took root beneath his calm exterior. Her cold eyes glanced over Taeha without a hint of emotion. Her voice was soft but cutting. And I don't want to know, even if you actually do it. She didn't need reasons. She only needed results. In the blood-stained room under the crimson sunset, Taeha stood silently, still gripping the blood-stained blade. She turned back, her eyes questioning and cautious. What is it? Her voice was as sharp as a knife, shattering the deadly atmosphere. Taeha stood still, gazing at the pool of blood at his feet, his eyes unwavering. For him, this was more than just a lesson. It was a brutal reminder. In this world, betrayal never ends peacefully. A traitor didn't just need to die. They needed to die in a terrifying way, so that the echo of their evil would spread like a plague. This was how the Salerno family instilled fear, by distorting the truth, amplifying the tragedy, and turning it into a cautionary tale for all who remained. Taeha stepped out of the darkness, the light casting a glow on the small bloodstain from the blade. His voice was cold and unwavering. This way, they won't dare betray us again. If not, I'll personally hunt them down, one by one. He was no longer the boy he once was. Taeha had become a living warning to the entire underworld. She looked down at Taeha, her eyes a mix of surprise and helplessness. So you chose to kill them in the most horrific way, just to avoid killing more. Her voice was tinged with bitterness, as if she understood, but couldn't accept it. The room seemed to sink into the gloomy atmosphere of a sacrificial ritual. 3 people stood in the only beam of light, while the surrounding corners were swallowed by darkness and blood-red shadows. Their gazes were cold and solemn, like those who had grown accustomed to such brutal scenes. Taeha stood motionless in the white light, his face calm and his eyes seemingly filled with contradictions. While those around him were steeped in blood and anger, he remained spotless, a face untainted by blood, yet speaking of horrors like one who had stepped out of the depths of Phlegethon. The woman smiled faintly, her eyes narrowing as if she had understood Taeha's innermost thoughts. She exhaled softly, then spoke without judgment or sarcasm. As I thought, being an assassin doesn't suit you. Her words were both a sign of understanding and an acknowledgement that Taeha wasn't born to have blood on his hands. A muscular back slammed into the wall, causing the entire partition to crack, as if it might shatter. A flash of blue light burst forth in the collision, making the scene even more intense. A powerful strike had just been unleashed, leaving the opponent no chance to react. There was no need to see the face. This was a declaration of power through action. Blood splattered in the dazzling light. The strike had been not only decisive, but also ruthless. The man took the full force of the blow to his face, his head snapping back, his initial arrogance lost. It was a brief moment, but enough to turn the tide. Jin Cheng and his female bodyguard stood frozen, their eyes fixed in shock at what was unfolding before them. Neither could have anticipated the sudden turn of events. Their intended prey had counterattacked with unrelenting ferocity. The astonishment stemmed not just from the display of strength, but from the cold, calculating gaze of the one who had struck. Thrown against the wall, Taeha gritted his teeth as he struggled to his feet, dual daggers in hand. Blood soaked through the wound on his side, yet his gaze remained unflinching. Though his body was on the brink of collapse, he was ready to continue fighting. This was no longer a battle for survival, but an affirmation. The once victim had now become the harbinger of death. A single tear fell silently from Taeha's eye, not from pain, but from memories. In his cold, frosty gaze lay the anguish of years marked by betrayal and torment. Amidst the violence and bloodshed, his heart had not yet turned to stone. The man gripped his sword and gun tightly, his voice strained with rage. Damn it! His eyes blazed with a hatred that had reached its limit. Faced with such fury, he knew, this battle would leave no room for hesitation. Taeha charged forward like lightning, his daggers slicing through the air in an instant. Blood splattered across the cold, grey floor. The enemy hadn't even managed to pull the trigger before collapsing, their eyes still trying to comprehend what had just happened. One swift strike, decisive and absolute, that was Taeha's response. With a speed that was terrifying and a strength capable of cleaving a sword in two, Taeha rendered the initial assessments of his opponents laughable. Their calculations had gone awry from the start. They had underestimated the frenzy hidden behind his calm demeanor. All who had witnessed Taeha's true strength had met their demise. No one could survive after seeing him unleash his full potential. This was his true prowess, a killer cloaked in serenity, yet wielding skills that even the underworld would fear. Taeha breathed heavily, blood trickling from the corner of his mouth. The physical pain was overshadowed by the weight pressing upon his heart. He knew he had exceeded his limits, but it was this that had allowed him to survive. Panic-stricken screams echoed through the hallway as a subordinate rushed in, his hand trembling as he clutched his gun. Everything had unraveled too quickly. None of them had been warned about the nightmare unfolding within. The silver-haired man stood with his hands clasped behind his back, his cold, piercing gaze fixed into the distance. He called out to his associate in the darkness, "Moon Dane." Without needing to turn around, his voice was enough to tense the atmosphere. "Get the young master out," he commanded, his voice calm yet unyielding. Moon Dane turned around, a flicker of hesitation in her eyes, but she didn't protest. "I'll follow after." The air grew thick, foreshadowing something ominous. Taeha sprang into action immediately, his eyes cold and alert, reacting on instinct as an unexpected attack loomed from behind. A dagger flashed in the air, mere inches from his neck. The sudden situation forced him to muster all his speed. There was no time for hesitation. Taeha suddenly realized Jin Chung was making his escape. His consciousness screamed in denial. He couldn't let him get away. His eyes blazed with killing intent. All surrounding sounds were muffled, leaving only his racing heartbeat and a singular goal: to stop Jin Chung at all costs. The female bodyguard froze for a moment upon hearing the scream echoing from behind. She quickly turned around, her eyes filled with alertness and concern. No need to ask, she understood. Something beyond their plan had occurred, and the man named Taeha had lost his composure. Taeha charged forward like a tempest, delivering a precise kick to the assassin who had been about to draw his gun. The man's body was flung back, crashing to the floor along with his gun. Everything happened in a flash. No time to defend, no chance to retaliate. Jin Chung reacted with surprise upon hearing the noise or sensing something amiss. The tense expression and the light from behind highlighted the escalating situation, indicating that Jin Chung had begun to sense danger closing in. Taeha roared with anger, "Where do you think you're going? I'm still here." A strong declaration, not just a reaction, but a statement refusing to be underestimated or left behind. His cold gaze and resolute expression erupted in a decisive moment of the battle. The door swung open, a calm voice resonating through the blood-stained room. "Long time no see, young Master Taeha." Taeha gnashed his teeth, blood still fresh at the corner of his mouth, his eyes blazing with extreme anger. "Beak Junsu." Taeha shouted in despair and indignation, his daggers raised high, charging straight at the one who blocked his path. "Get out now." Taeha's ultimate technique was stopped in an instant by just 2 fingers. Shock was evident in his eyes. Baek Junsu smiled with a hint of killing intent, his hand still gripping Taeha's dual daggers as if they were child's play. With a cold and appreciative gaze, he said, "You've grown up. I, Baek Junsu, officially acknowledge you." Baek Junsu launched a sharp counterattack. The old man's arm seemed to turn into a shadow, piercing through Taeha's attack and sending him flying backward. Taeha hadn't reacted yet when the dagger was knocked out of his hand, blood splattering everywhere. On Baek Junsu's face was a cold smile, ruthless yet proud. Baek Junsu's strike not only sent Taeha flying, but also caused his body to violently shake from the inside. His ribcage felt like it was being crushed, his heartbeat pounding strongly and rapidly, creating a suffocating tension. The difference in strength between the two generations was frighteningly clear. Taeha spat out a mouthful of blood, his body unable to withstand the aftermath of Baek Junsu's strike. The pain tore through his chest, blood gushing out of his mouth as a living proof of his helplessness against a legend. Baek Junsu gripped the dagger tightly, his cold eyes flashing with a hint of pity. With a light twist of his hand, he broke the blade into pieces, as a definitive declaration that the battle was over. "However, this is the end," he said coldly, as if pronouncing a death sentence on Taeha. Baek Junsu's powerful kick landed on Taeha's abdomen, causing his body to bend in pain. Without any hesitation or mercy, only the absolute superiority of a seasoned killer over a young man still driven by a desire for revenge. The strike sealed the end of Taeha's last hope for resistance. Taeha's body rolled on the floor, blood staining the area as a testament to the brutal kick. Baek Junsu stood there, calm as if everything was predetermined. No words were needed. His cold gaze was enough to plunge the surroundings into a deadly silence. A one-sided battle was nearing its end. Baek Junsu paused, his eyes narrowing in confusion as he noticed a tear in his sleeve. Although it was just a small cut, it was enough to make the man who had declared the battle is over take a second look. A flash of surprise, and perhaps admiration, crossed his eyes. Baek Junsu stepped forward, coldly calling out, "Get up, Haejeong Junhyuk, I know you're still alive." There was no pity or hesitation in his eyes, only contempt for someone trying to play dead in front of him. Blood still stained the floor, but Junsu wasn't concerned. To him, the game was just beginning. Haejeong Junhyuk sprang up with an awkward smile, scratching his head sheepishly. "Whoa, Tilda, I was so scared I almost died, Tilda." His tone was light, as if the life-or-death battle just now was just a joke. But behind his playful eyes was a vigilance that hadn't diminished. He knew the person he was facing wasn't someone to be taken lightly. Baek Junsu turned his back and walked away, his calm voice echoing down the blood-stained hallway. "This place is about to blow. Get Moon Yeongmin out." Without looking back, he gave the order as if everything was under his control, no longer just a killer, but the one deciding the outcome. Taeha was thrown to the floor like a discarded object, lying motionless in the vast room. The angry gaze was gone, replaced by distant screams and an encroaching cold silence that was gradually swallowing all sound. Baek Junsu walked slowly into the night, the wind from the helicopter's rotors swirling his clothes. Without looking back or showing any attachment, the man had concluded a purge. On the quiet helicopter cabin, Jin Chung sat comfortably as if nothing had happened. He asked briefly, and Baek Junsu responded decisively, a cold-blooded man leaving no trail, ready to erase everything once they took off. Jin Chung urged hastily, his face excited, as if he had just escaped a thrilling game. Baek Junsu remained calm, ordering the helicopter to take off with a voice that didn't waver. The aircraft began to shake, carrying the two men behind the bloodshed away from the scene. Baek Junsu calmly put on his headphones, his eyes still cold as usual. With a simple command, he ordered the cabin door to be closed, as if he was afraid of dust, not the crimes behind. Jin Chung smiled excitedly, his eyes gleaming with madness. He didn't want to leave, not before witnessing the hellish scene he had been waiting for. The helicopter began to take off, its rotors swirling in the night. The door still open, Jin Chung stood still, gazing down at the ground, a place that was about to turn to ashes. Jin Chung stood leaning against the helicopter's doorframe, his tie fluttering in the wind. A triumphant smile was evident on his face. The moment of revenge he had been waiting for had finally arrived. The mansion appeared under the cold moonlight, surrounded by high walls and silent trees. Jin Chung stood from afar, his hateful gaze piercing through the darkness. "This damn house," he hissed. This was the place that had imprisoned his childhood, where all his nightmares began. Sitting across from each other in the secluded cabin, Jin Chung shed his mask. His voice was icy, always preaching about family, about bloodline. It's all just a lie. Beside him, Moon Dane remained silent, just listening. The truth is, they fear losing power. That's why they cling to it with blood, not with faith. Taeha screamed in despair, his voice tearing through the space that was gradually being consumed by the helicopter's engine noise. His eyes blazed with anger and helplessness, as if trying to hold on to everything. But the figure had already left, without looking back. Baek Junsu sat calmly in the helicopter cabin, his cold eyes fixed ahead. Beside him, Moon Dane gripped her seatbelt tightly, listening silently. Baek Junsu's voice came out heavy, sarcastic. "Family, kinship, it's all just a lie." He asserted that the so-called bloodline was merely a cover to maintain power. The air in the cabin sank, reflecting the bitter reality of a world where even blood ties were exploited for political gain. A moment that clearly reflected Jin Chung's cold nature and arrogant attitude after witnessing the fate of someone he deemed weak and pitiful. Jin Chung smiled triumphantly, straightening his tie as if declaring victory. After all the calculations, he was now unapologetically ambitious. He would personally change the Chunggu group with blood, power, and betrayal. The Chunggu mansion was engulfed in a sea of flames. A deafening explosion tore through the night, permanently erasing all traces of the old generation. Jin Chung had struck, and this was the beginning of a new era. Taeha lay motionless on the cold tile floor, blood staining the area around his wound. The explosion echoed from afar, like a final farewell to someone who had once stood at the center of a storm but couldn't change their fate. Taeha lay gasping among the ruins, his dull eyes looking up at the scorched ceiling. The sound of the helicopter reverberated through the air thick with gunpowder, closer, clearer. In the depths of his eyes, a glimmer of light flickered, on the boundary between life and despair. The last glimmer of light in Taeha's eyes. Despite his shattered body and unceasing bleeding, his will to survive hadn't extinguished. He gritted his teeth, reassuring himself it wasn't too late. The chance for revenge, the chance to live wasn't over yet. From amidst the sea of flames and corpses, Taeha suddenly launched himself onto the helicopter, his hand clenching a blood-stained knife. Under the fiery glow reflecting from the explosion, his back seemed to transform into a demon risen from the dead, accompanied by a scream that tore through the sky. No one was to leave without paying the price. At the edge of the helicopter cabin, Jin Chung stretched, breathing out in relief amidst the fiery wind, as if the hellish scene behind was just a gentle breeze. In the light of the flames below, his smile became twisted, radiant yet venomous to the point of being terrifying. From the midst of the fiercely erupting flames, Taeha shot onto the helicopter like a surviving arrow. Amidst the earth-shattering explosion, he still managed to utter a cold remark, as if he had orchestrated the destruction behind him. Taeha charged into the helicopter cabin in an instant, his eyes still burning with fury. Ahead of him, Jin Chung still wore a triumphant smile, ordering the helicopter to head towards the headquarters urgently, completely unaware of the deadly threat that had just survived hell and was right behind him. The knife blade pierced through Jin Chung's calf in a flash, blood spurting out to stain his white pants red. The sudden pain cut off the arrogant smile still on his face. Jin Chung's scream tore through the air, his face distorted in pain and horror. Blood pulsed with each heartbeat, and fear finally manifested. Baek Junsu and Moon Dane turned their heads simultaneously, their shocked gazes piercing through the helicopter cabin. The cry of "Master" echoed, shattering their pretended calm, for the nightmare from the sea of flames was approaching, bringing with it unprecedented wrath. Taeha rose from the brink of death, his blood-stained hand clenching a dagger that stabbed straight into Jin Chung's thigh. In the flickering light and the swaying helicopter cabin, Jin Chung screamed in terror, but Taeha's eyes had lost all humanity. Taeha screamed, his voice trembling with the pain in his chest and mind. The hand that gripped Jin Chung's neck was not just driven by the hatred of a son who lost his family, but also by outrage against the one who betrayed his own bloodline. The scream tore through the helicopter cabin. Blood splattered everywhere as Taeha's dagger pierced Jin Chung's calf, a counterattack that was unimaginable against the one who had brought despair to both their families. Blood stained half his face, his eyes blazing with hatred. Taeha roared as if tearing through the night sky. A vow of life and death erupted in the burning helicopter cabin. "Jin Chung, I will definitely kill you." Moon Dane quickly drew her gun, moving forward with a determined gaze. She raised her gun, ordering firmly, "Step back." Her voice was not shaky, but urgent. Jin Chung roared in anger, his eyes wild. "Shut up! Give it to me!" He snatched the gun from Moon Dane's hand, not giving her a chance to resist. The situation on the helicopter immediately descended into chaos. Taeha clung to the helicopter door in the night sky, his body covered in blood, but his eyes still burning. However, facing this will to survive, Jin Chung just looked down, laughing disdainfully. "You think you're the protagonist of this story?" As if everything that was happening was within his control. Jin Chung didn't need to hide his arrogance anymore. He aimed the gun straight at Taeha, who was clinging to the helicopter door, his eyes blazing with madness. "Sorry, but you're not the protagonist," he roared, pulling the trigger without hesitation. "I am the protagonist here, you wretch." Each bullet was like a declaration to end the last hope of his challenger. Taeha, his body full of wounds, his shirt stained red with blood, fell freely through the air. The bullets that had pierced his body were still hot, but his eyes remained resolute, burning with determination. His hand clenched the dagger tightly. He didn't collapse, but was just preparing for a final counterattack. Despite gravity and the bleeding wounds, Taeha stretched his hand towards the helicopter that was moving away. Between the night sky and the howling wind, the dagger still clutched in his right hand. His eyes didn't look down into the abyss, but were fixed on the target in the sky. This was not the end. This was the final counterattack. The helicopter shook violently in the night sky as the sound of gunfire suddenly erupted from behind. In the cockpit, the pilot frantically sent a distress signal to Chunggu Hospital. But no one knew the real nightmare was still chasing from behind. Between the dark night sky, two helicopters rushed towards the city. Under the faint moonlight, the shadowy figures were still persistently pursuing, dragging out an unending revenge. Taeha's body plunged downwards like a broken arrow, piercing through the forest canopy in the cold night. No one called out his name now, only the howling wind and the merciless gravity took him. The night wind howled through the dense trees in the quiet neighborhood. No one knew that a life was falling from the sky, bringing with it a silent scream and an unfinished tragedy. The blood-stained body crashed onto the roof edge, leaving a long smear of blood on the cold brick wall. A devastating blow had ended the frantic pursuit in the sky, but the will was not extinguished. Falling from the roof, Taeha's body crashed onto the car roof and rolled like a lifeless corpse on the cold concrete. The impact sounded heavy in the night, but his eyes were still not closed. The hatred had not allowed him to collapse. A soft splash sound echoed through the quiet night, the cold water rippling. Taeha's body had fallen into the small canal after the violent impact, merging into the darkness, where the hatred was still not over. The ripples on the water quickly subsided. Only the distant sound of engines and the faint streetlights witnessed the moment when the survivor sank into the night, as if he had never existed. While the water still flowed smoothly under the night lights, a stranger appeared on the distant railing. Looking down at the scene below, as if searching for something that had disappeared into the night. A young man with grey hair appeared in the darkness, his eyes calm as if he had witnessed the entire chaotic pursuit. And now, he was the only one left to face the remnants of that chaos. In the cold stream under the moonlight, Taeha lay motionless, his blood spreading in the clear water. His body was battered after the fierce battle, but his hand still clutched the dagger tightly. The will for revenge had not been relinquished. The grey-haired youth stopped his bike in the deserted night, looking up at the sky filled with dark clouds. A faint question escaped his lips in the wind. Was it already too late? His gaze quietly turned towards the stream, where fate had just taken a turn. The grey-haired youth suddenly froze in the middle of the night, his eyes wide with surprise at the faint sound coming from the dark water behind him. The two words that echoed, "Help me," were enough to snap him out of his thoughts, sensing a fragile fate waiting to be grasped. Under the gloomy sky filled with gathering clouds, the grey-haired youth stopped his bicycle on the small bridge. His eyes fell silent, gazing down at the water below, where a faint cry for help had just echoed through the night. The air was suffocatingly silent, as if the world was waiting for his next decision. The eyes beneath the drooping hair suddenly opened wide. From the empty gaze, a spark of determination arose, not of surprise, but of resolve. He had heard, and he had chosen. In the still water, the faint whisper seemed to echo from the depths. "Sa, Vi," a desperate cry on the brink of life and death, heard by no one except him. In the dark, cold water, Taeha's blood-stained body floated silently. His eyes opened slightly, his lips barely moving with a faint plea, "Save me," like a final cry for help in a long, desperate night. Although his body was numb and blood spread in the icy water, Taeha's eyes still burned with a flame of unyielding determination. He had not accepted defeat. In that weak breath, the final whisper was still a fierce longing to live. "Please, save me," as if affirming that this revenge was not yet over.
An 11-minute recording played, the man's voice dripping with desperation as he repeatedly begged for help after failing the competency test for the third time. But just seconds later, the pleading turned to rage as he roared. "Do you know who I am? I'm Kim XX. Want me to drag you down with me?" The words sliced through the air like a cold blade, leaving a heavy echo in the listener's ears. A message followed immediately. "Did you hear it? How did it sound?" Before there was time to react, another message came. "I heard you're under police investigation." The other person simply replied, in silent acknowledgement. But the caller wasn't done. "Don't you think you owe me 200K? The chat bubble displayed. "Typing." The air seemed to freeze, signaling the storm had yet to truly begin. The other person replied coldly with just 2 words, "Only 30. The guy in front of the screen froze, his eyes wide in shock. He had already heard the recording beforehand. "What? You've already heard it?" He tried to deny it. "It's not election season, who would want that stuff?" But the other person remained unfazed, calmly responding. "I don't need it, but have you forgotten? On the market, if a normal person's worth 1, an A-lister's 10. The next message was a decisive blow, and that guy's 1,000. The final reply left him stunned. "That person's worth 1,000 times more than an ordinary person." The blue light from the screen cast a tense, bitter expression on his face. He threw his head back and let out a dry laugh, as if everything had finally become clear. "Those Chenggu bastards, unbelievable." The walkie-talkie crackled in the silent space, and a voice came through the radio. "An incident just occurred at XX Tower in Jongno, currently." The urgent news was being relayed, but those who truly needed to hear it had known long before and were waiting for it to explode. No response, just a decisive press of the walkie-talkie's switch, cutting off communication. The urgent news was stifled mid-sentence, as if someone didn't want the world to know what was about to happen. Just seconds after cutting the walkie-talkie, he stepped out of the room, a bag slung over one shoulder, his other hand flicking the skateboard leaning against the wall. Without hesitation, without shoes, as if time was counting down and he couldn't afford to stand still for even a second longer. As he opened the door and stepped in, the early morning light caught his messy silver hair. Before he could even take off his bag, his eyes quickly scanned the familiar kitchen as if checking for something. Everything was in its usual place, but the atmosphere was different, eerily silent and alerting. He walked into the quiet restaurant, where only the rhythmic chopping from the kitchen staff preparing for the morning could be heard. No one noticed his arrival, but his presence seemed to weigh down the entire room. The clock on the wall neared 7 a.m. Perhaps things were about to begin. The sound of chopping vegetables stopped, replaced by the familiar scolding of the woman in the kitchen. "Hey, want to be late for school, you little brat?" He didn't turn around, the skateboard still dangling behind him, indifferent as if the scolding was just background noise of a familiar morning. But today, things wouldn't be the same. He turned, his voice full of defiance. "Not happening. I'm skating to school." The skateboard was raised like a declaration, both rebellious and free. While everyone else hurried along with their routines, he chose to dive into the new day his own way, even though he knew today wasn't an ordinary day. The woman wasn't backing down, holding up a bowl of rice and shouting back, "Then eat first!" But he was already blocking the doorway, angrily swinging the skateboard as if about to throw it down. "Eating now will make me late for sure. Are you kidding me?" The familiar argument between the two began again, but this time, beneath the back and forth, there was something different. His eyes narrowed, a cold glint flashing through the strands of hair falling over his forehead. A sudden thought crossed his mind, making his lips curl into a mocking smirk. "HMPH, this'll get messy if this place doesn't even have a single customer." A warning disguised as sarcasm, but beneath it was the simmering scent of gunpowder, just waiting for a spark to ignite. Three men walked in with knowing smiles, their provocative voices cutting through the quiet restaurant. "Who'd want to eat at a place with lousy soup?" Another chimed in, his tone arrogant as if the outcome was already decided. "You'd better just sell this place already." Their words were light but carried the weight of a boulder, and the threat began to seep through the steam of the still-hot soup. The one in the middle took half a step forward, his smile curved like a blade, his disdainful gaze sweeping the restaurant. "Isn't that right?" His voice was soft but full of intent. He was Choi Boksu, leader of the Yabari faction, a name that had forced many shops in the area to close without reason. And now the next target was this small kitchen. The woman didn't look up, her voice cold as she spoke amidst the sound of chopping. "Coming to collect interest this early in the morning?" Her tone wasn't loud, but each word was sharp. She continued firmly, "I'm busy." No fear, no submission, just a chef defending her kitchen with a knife and unwavering resolve. She didn't turn around, continuing to chop vegetables as if the men didn't exist. Her voice was soft but firm, "And you don't worry, just go to school." Then, succinct and commanding, "Let me handle this here." In the small kitchen, her back was like a solid wall, strong enough to block both storms and threats. He stood frozen, lips pressed tight, his gaze hidden beneath his messy hair. No retort, none of the usual stubbornness, just a heavy silence. His heart clenched at her words, because he knew the back shielding him had been bearing it all alone for far too long. Choi Boksu smirked, reaching into his vest, not to adjust it, but to pull out a thin, gleaming knife freshly sharpened. "Don't jump to conclusions," he said, his tone still teasing but his eyes icy. "After 2 months of waiting, our patience has run out." The glint of the blade was the clearest warning. Today they weren't here to talk. Choi Boksu slammed the knife into the table, the blade sinking in with a chilling asterisk thunk asterisk. He threw his head back and laughed, as if offering a generous opportunity. "If you sell the building now, you'll still keep some of the money." Then, lowering his voice, he drawled each word like poison. "The interest is already included. Sounds fair, doesn't it?" The offer was an ultimatum, and the knife was the final punctuation. She didn't need to step forward or raise her voice. With one swift motion, she swung her knife, the sharp blade cutting through the air like a warning. "Who'd be stupid enough to sell this building for half its value?" Her voice was steely, each word hitting the thugs straight on. "You'd better go back and learn how to calculate interest, then come back later." No other weapon was needed. The kitchen knife in her hand was enough to make anyone think twice. Outside Bauman's soup, under the transparent awning, the old man muttered through gritted teeth, "Those bastards!" No need to look to know he'd heard everything. And perhaps what was simmering in his heart right now was more dangerous than the men with knives inside. He stood silently in front of the shop, the cold blue light casting over his expressionless face. Each breath came out like smoke, slow but heavy. The skateboard still hung at his side, but the gaze beneath his unkempt hair had changed. No longer that of a student heading to school, but of someone preparing to do something irreversible. He lived in Wangchenggu, a redevelopment zone where old and new clashed for every inch of land. The old alleys, tarp-covered stalls, stacked cardboard boxes, all reflected a life of struggle but resilience. In this seemingly forgotten place, Bamun's soup was the only thing that still held warmth, and for him it wasn't just home, it was something no one was allowed to touch. Due to the conflict between the Chunggu and Oseong factions, this area had gradually been abandoned, dragged into a power struggle the residents never wanted. He skated through the empty streets like a ghost, belonging to a place the city had forgotten. But for him, this wasn't a dead zone. It was a place no one was allowed to trample on with greed. Living here wasn't easy, as the gangs in the area didn't care about the law. They operated by the law of the jungle, laughing at the fear of the residents, and using their fists to seize control of every house, every inch of land. And at the center of this chaos were people like Choi Boksu, smirking as if the entire district was his personal backyard. Wang Xinggu, a neglected redevelopment zone, now the perfect hideout for Aunt Nana. Despite her bruised face, Aunt Seo Youngsok kept working as usual, her voice icy as she ordered the boy to clean the tables. As soon as he stepped inside, he froze at the sight of her bruised face. Fury surged within him. The old regular sitting nearby sighed softly, recounting what had happened. The Yaburi gang had come here in broad daylight. Hearing that, his expression darkened. Every feature tightened with anger. Those bastards were forcing them to sell their home. She immediately cut him off. Without letting him get involved, she ordered firmly, "Put the bag down, eat." Without arguing, he silently turned around and walked toward the kitchen, still clutching the skateboard in his hand. The backpack was thrown hard into the corner of the wall. The wave of anger had yet to subside. He slumped onto the chair, holding his head in frustration. Damn it, why did this happen? Amidst countless thoughts, an image emerged clearly: Aunt Youngsok, his father's closest friend. She was once a renowned medical professor, but to protect the orphaned boy, she gave up everything to flee with him. Now that woman had to stand in the cramped kitchen, enduring the smell of broth and the unappetizing sundae soaked in vinegar. In the dark room filled with wires and screens, he was no longer an ordinary student. He began to compare. If an average person was 1, a celebrity was 10, but Chunggu was something far beyond human limits. A decisive keystroke. He had uncovered a terrifying number. Chunggu was 1,000 times, and that meant unforgivable. A strange message suddenly appeared, catching his attention. He was still focused on typing, unaware that another stalker had quietly sent shocking information. Jang Juhak, the CEO of Chunggu, was bringing Miho, the leader of the LAYD group, along as his right-hand man. He suppressed his shock, cold sweat beating on his temples. Chunggu is 10 times the top star. Those words hit him like a sledgehammer. The next morning, the sky was clear, but a strange encounter unexpectedly took place. 2 unfamiliar men approached, calling him Gray. The man in the green shirt sat confidently behind the desk, holding a stack of documents. He feigned surprise, but his eyes betrayed satisfaction at discovering Gray's true value. Before he could resist, Gray suddenly took a devastating punch to the stomach. The shock came as quickly as he was dragged into a game he didn't fully understand. Dragged to the waiting black car, Gray was no longer an invisible boy. He was now the real target of some dirty scheme. Thrown into the car, Gray curled up, clutching his head. In his daze, a phrase echoed in his mind, 1,000 times. Sitting silently before the interrogator, Gray realized he was just bait. Head bowed in silence, his pink shirt wrinkled, he couldn't hide the rising hatred. The investigator slammed a stack of photos on the table, his cold gaze piercing through. "Tell the truth, kid. Where did you get these pictures?" Gray remained silent, but his eyes betrayed his turmoil. The man smirked faintly. "Ah, you want revenge for your father, don't you?" He quickly dug into the past. "You're the leftover kid after betraying Haejeong Jingu, the senior researcher who once worked for Chunggu, right?" Gray lowered his head, a faint smirk on his lips, silent but full of implications. The investigator clenched his fist, teeth grinding. "Are you laughing?" The man angrily slapped Gray's head, the sound echoing like it shattered the silence in the room. Under the cold stares of many, the anger continued to erupt. He roared, relentlessly questioning the source of the photo. The next blow sent him flying off the chair, slamming onto the cold floor. He still didn't stop. He lay sprawled on the tiled floor, blood trickling from his lip, but a mocking laugh still softly rang out, silencing the room. Despite his injuries, He raised his head, a provocative smile on his face. His voice dripping with sarcasm, he mocked the man who had just beaten him as a rotten old man desperate for money. While everyone was still busy talking, an urgent message suddenly arrived. The man in the blue shirt stood still, his eyes hardening. A crisis had just erupted amidst the chaos. His expression shifted with suspicion. Whether out of worry or anger, he spoke carelessly, but his eyes began to dart around. Without hesitation, he coldly ordered, "Bring the hammer," a simple command that instantly froze the air. This was no longer an interrogation. Now he sat on the victim, raising the hammer and growling like a beast. "Want me to knock all your teeth out?" But just then a frantic call rang out. The man behind him shouted, "Sir, a Code 1 emergency," shaking the entire room. After ordering Gray to be gagged and thrown into the holding cell, he still hadn't quelled his rage, the peak of his despicable power. Gray was kicked into the dark room without explanation. He smirked sinisterly, tossing out a warning like throwing trash. In the cold darkness, Gray opened his eyes. Beside him were two others, also tied and gagged. He began to realize he wasn't the only victim. Memories surfaced. His father, who had once exposed Chungu with naive faith in justice, ended up dead along with his mother. The accident was fabricated as a mishap, but Gray knew better. It was the price of truth in a world full of lies and rotten power. Bound tightly, he could only bow his head in the darkness, helpless to the point of despair. Just because he wasn't strong enough, he could do nothing but endure the humiliation. No matter how big the secret he held, before oppressive power it became meaningless. His clenched hands could only tremble in silence. A small sound made the two others look up. A strange young man appeared in the room, suddenly tensing the atmosphere. A shout came from outside. "Raid!" Chaos erupted, followed by screams and intense gunfire. "You lunatic, what are you doing here?" a crazed voice shouted. "Die!" Everything signaled the impending storm of fury. In the dark room, the three hostages looked up at the chaotic sounds outside, their eyes filled with confusion and fear. On high alert, the silver-haired young man opened his eyes wide, the fire in his gaze reflecting a hidden instinct awakening. A masked man stepped in, his demeanor cold. He swung a sword in front of them. "Cut the ropes and everyone can leave." He turned his head, his sharp eyes locking onto the young man. "We've never met, remember that." The light shone on the dagger stuck in the floor, surrounded by three bleeding hostages. An opportunity was given, but the price behind it remained unclear. The three rushed out of the room filled with corpses in panic, blood everywhere as evidence of a massacre. Meanwhile, the masked man stood silently, his cold eyes unwavering. The silver-haired young man turned his head, his eyes thoughtful. Beneath the messy hair was a face not of fear, but of chilling calmness. Before him were the bodies of those who had just tortured him. Surrounded by blood and bullets, what sent shivers down his spine was the silent question: did one person do all this? After escaping, he returned to a small diner. Though his body was battered, his steps were more decisive than ever. The door opened, the bell ringing like a signal of a new beginning. His aunt was stunned to see him in such a pitiful state, but he didn't answer. After all, what he needed now was a moment of calm before the next storm. Haejeong's aunt rushed over in panic, her eyes filled with worry as she saw her nephew covered in wounds. But Haejeong raised his hand to reassure her. "I'm fine, it's nothing serious." Haejeong smiled brightly to reassure her, though his bruised face was heartbreaking. "I'm okay, Auntie, don't worry." Not wanting his aunt to see him weak, Haejeong quickly turned away, walking into the kitchen with a firm demeanor. His aunt stood silently, speechless. The slanting light made her expression even more doubtful and anxious. The door slammed shut. Alone in the storage room, Haejeong sat down, his hands trembling. Now the strong facade crumbled, leaving only a young man wounded in body and spirit. In the dark room, Haejeong leaned back, his mind swirling with questions. Who was that guy? From Oseong, or a new force that had just stepped in? He killed everyone with just a dagger. Even the armed men didn't escape. The enemy was Chungu, yet he acted as if it was nothing. Haejeong rummaged through the drawer, gripping a small object. Only one thought remained in his mind. Who sent him here? Or did he have a personal grudge against Chungu? In the dim light, a row of USB drives appeared. The answer might be right inside. In the past, he had been humiliated and looked down upon, labeled as the traitorous son, the useless one who had abandoned his loyalty to Haejeong Jingu. When he plugged the red USB into the computer, an angry roar erupted as if from the past. The man shouted, asking where he had gotten it. Even with countless classified corporate files, media manipulation playbooks, shareholder structures, boardroom cabals, everything became meaningless without power. In the dark room, the cold light from the screen illuminated his determined eyes. He whispered to himself, "I need power." A tsunami of encrypted files appeared before him. He knew he couldn't grasp it all just by glancing. To change the game, he needed more than intelligence. Alone in the dark room, Haejeong worked diligently by the row of monitors, the cold blue glow reflecting on his impassive face, his hands never stopping on the keyboard. At Jingu's office, panic erupted as the central systems blared alerts. A Code 1 emergency had just been declared. The file marked as Emergency Case 1 was Jingu's internal electronic report, something that absolutely must not leak out. Haejeong stared at the screen, his eyes wide open. In his hand was the security protocol file, the key to their true hideout. Under the glow of dozens of screens, Haejeong discovered that when the company faced a crisis, the leaders would hold an emergency meeting at the safe bunker in Bukaksan, an area controlled by corporate satellite territories in Gangbuk. He sighed, letting go of the mouse. Despite digging through all the data, he still couldn't pinpoint the exact location of the executive meeting. "I don't even know who he is," he whispered, his trembling hand clutching the USB, his eyes filled with helplessness in the darkness. But then, he recalled an old saying, "If you're fighting against Jingu, you can't be a bad person." His doubt gradually turned into a fragile belief. Over the secure frequency, a voice urgently announced, a massacre had occurred at Safe House 13, Street 4 on the way to Bukaksan. Emergency units had been dispatched. The data reported that the crime scene was Jingu's classified residential compound. The extent of the damage was unclear, but Directive 9X had been activated. All information leaks must be prevented at any cost. After a series of dead-end data, a crucial clue suddenly appeared on the screen. He jumped to his feet, his heart racing as he finally found a trace. Without hesitation, he opened the rack and pulled the bicycle out of the dark corner, ready to act. The door swung open, and he wheeled the bike out of the diner, the streetlights casting a long shadow beneath the feet of someone who had decided not to stand still anymore. On the quiet road, the wheels spun urgently. He didn't know who the other person was, nor did he understand the reason for the chaos at AH Holdings. But one thing he knew for sure, staying still wouldn't change anything. The wind whistled past his ears as he clenched his teeth and sped up. Though the outcome was unclear, at least he was moving toward the truth. As he raced forward in a haze, he suddenly saw someone clinging to a helicopter in the night sky. Moments later, gunshots rang out. The person fell straight down, causing him to panic and pedal frantically toward the scene. At first glance, he thought the person surely wouldn't survive. But surprisingly, the person was still alive. A faint whisper for help echoed in the cold water. The man was covered in wounds, blood pooling around the dagger still tightly gripped in his hand. Though bleeding profusely, the man's eyes in the water still glimmered with life. He managed to whisper, "It's not over yet." The silver-haired boy stood frozen. In his eyes was clear astonishment. He hadn't expected the man to still be alive. Without hesitation, he carried the injured man back to the familiar diner, shouting loudly for his relative, "Auntie, Auntie." The woman who had just stepped out of the kitchen was shocked. "What's going on? Who is this?" He nearly burst into tears, screaming in desperation, "Please save him, please save him." At this moment, on the razor's edge between breathing and bleeding out, there was only one belief left, the hope to survive. Taeha woke up in the dim light, his skeptical eyes meeting the stranger before him, the one who had risked everything to save him. The man introduced himself as Gray, the ghost in Jingu's machine, the one all clues ultimately led back to. Gray looked straight at Taeha, his eyes burning with ice-cold certainty, and spoke words heavy with the weight of prophecies fulfilled. "You're the one I've been waiting for all this time." Taeha stood before Haejeong, his gaze wary. He couldn't believe the man before him had the audacity to call himself an information merchant. Haejeong shrugged, casually admitting he was a wholesale data broker, dealing in unverified information, ready to hand it over to the highest bidder. He boasted that his clients ranged from gossip mongers and brokers to the powerful financial elite in Uedo. Taeha clenched his fists. He had nearly lost his life in a trap, all because someone mistook him for an information merchant like Haejeong. Taeha's gaze was calm but icy. "You were the child held captive at AH Holdings that day. Did you find me just by recognizing my face?" Haejeong leaned back smugly, joking about awarding himself the title of youngest information merchant, as if this were a game he was leading. Meanwhile, Taeha stood silently by the file cabinet, his eyes fixed on something, seemingly scrutinizing every detail in this secret room. Leaning against the desk was a striking black skateboard with the words, "Gray Zone," an implicit nod to Haejeong's blurred ethical boundaries. The conversation fell silent. Haejeong murmured, "How many days have we been here now?" Taeha replied immediately, 4 days. Time passed quietly, thick with tension. Hearing this, Taeha froze. He frowned slightly, whispering to himself in self-reproach, "I've slept too long." Taeha hesitated, then stepped forward, his expression serious. He asked, "Gray, can you find someone for me?" Haejeong smirked, admitting bluntly, "When I found you, I just got lucky. For this, I'll need to rely on other information merchants." He stood up, his gaze still lazy but his words pragmatic, "And it'll cost you a fortune." Despite having saved each other's lives, Haejeong didn't forget to mention the medical expenses, a way to emphasize that every favor comes with a price. Taeha was momentarily stunned. His voice was soft but filled with disappointment. "So, you can't help me?" Gray narrowed his eyes, glancing at Taeha with hidden meaning. He simply asked, "And if I can't?" Without waiting for an answer, Gray suddenly sprang up from his chair. "Then I have no other choice." Taeha turned and walked away. Taeha grabbed his coat, not forgetting to turn back and say, "Thanks for the help. When I'm done, I'll repay you." Gray flustered, shouting, "Wait, you're leaving in that condition." But Taeha simply replied, "My work isn't finished." Taeha turned back, his gaze icy. "And don't try to get involved with me, or you'll face something worse than being kidnapped." After the door closed, Gray slumped into his chair, his eyes empty. He laughed, half mocking, half admiring. He actually walked out like that. Taeha stepped into an unfamiliar kitchen, his eyes scanning the area. A foul stench filled the air. The smell of rotting pork. Is this a restaurant? Before he could process it, a familiar voice came from behind the cabinet. "You shouldn't be moving yet." Gray's aunt stood by the kitchen table, not turning around. Her voice was calm. "You were shot with a .22 caliber bullet. I managed to stitch you up. But if you keep moving recklessly, the broken rib could puncture your lung." Gray's aunt continued cutting meat, coldly warning, "If the bone pierces through, even a doctor won't be able to save you." Taeha bowed his head in gratitude. "You're the one who saved me, right? I'll repay you later." The woman just shrugged. "I'm not a doctor. I run a tripe soup joint." Her words were as indifferent as the rough stitches on Taeha's body. Taeha left the restaurant, the sunlight filtering through a pale blue dome. The air was eerily quiet. He paused, his eyes scanning the empty surroundings. Is this a market? Taeha looked down at the phone in his hand, the screen's light casting a doubtful expression on his face. He stood in the deserted market, pressing the phone to his ear. "This isn't my phone." Gray remained calm at his keyboard. "The old one's broken, still being repaired. This one's the same model, use it for now." Gray's voice came through the earpiece. "There's something else in your pocket. It's an earpiece, take it out and use it." Taeha reached into his pocket, pulling out a small black earpiece. He frowned, sensing this wasn't simple. Gray received the new device from Taeha. The battery lasted 12 hours, the top button was a camera, and the earpiece was Bluetooth connected. Everything was ready for the upcoming mission. He gave one final warning. Anyone who got involved with him would have no way out. Taeha responded with a cold question. Was it because Gray had wiped out the entire Chungu family? Taeha wasn't surprised. Even in South Korea, someone who committed such a massacre couldn't escape unnoticed. While Gray remained in a coma, the entire nation was shaken by the news. The entire Chungu clan had been wiped out by a terrorist. Taeha tightened his grip on the phone, his voice icy cold. Despite being accused of murder, Taeha dared to ask for a favor. Gray responded nonchalantly. The place where Taeha stood was Jangseo, the demilitarized zone between Chengdu and Oseong, once drenched in blood due to reconstruction disputes. Though this area was isolated from both factions, it had its own internal issues that kept the residents in constant unrest. Though hesitant, Gray agreed to help, but with a condition. After the job was done, Taeha had to repay the favor in full. Gray issued a final warning: stay in contact, don't disappear. If not, he wouldn't hesitate to inform Chengdu, and there would be no turning back. Taeha paused for a moment, his expression unchanged, as if he was making a final assessment of Gray's trustworthiness. Taeha ended the call with a decisive statement: "Then let's see how good you really are." He walked away without looking back. The city never stopped moving. The hurried sounds of traffic echoed between the skyscrapers, a completely normal scene for a mission that was about to cross the line. The storage building came into view, a place with strict security, featuring cold, gold-plated doors and a modern control panel. The space seemed to warn, this is not a place just anyone can enter. The target was clear: Vault 2. The status light indicated open. Taeha had already begun his move. Taeha stood before the row of secure lockers, his hand reaching to open one, his gaze calm but calculating. "There's even a private vault company in Seoul," Gray questioned from the other end of the line, worried about leaving traces. Taeha calmly replied, "Their principle is trust. They don't collaborate with any other organizations." On the other side of the screen, Gray sat in a cafe, typing on his laptop and deep in thought. Places like this, with high security, were the best choice for storing sensitive items. Fake passports, cash, a white bulletproof vest. Gray took a sip of coffee, muttering, "This should be enough to blend in." Gray took another sip of coffee, his eyes never leaving the screen, as if he was considering something beyond the plan. A thought flashed through his mind. No gun, a knife wouldn't be enough. Was he planning to face the enemy with just that? Inside the storage room, a drop of sweat fell onto the cold stone floor, signaling that Taeha's body was beginning to show signs of strain. Even walking felt like being stabbed through the body, the dull pain creeping into every step. For a brief moment, his mind flashed back to the past, this feeling, exactly like when Regina had ambushed him years ago. Taeha was checking the locker again, his calm voice ringing out, a question aimed directly at Gray, about the man they had mentioned earlier. Gray responded from behind the screen, confirming the identity. Kim Pil-jung, CEO of Moving at Night, was the one who had brought Taeha to Korea. He had once operated in Europe, then suddenly rose to fame after arriving in Korea. According to sources, he was now trying to reach China via a smuggling ship. Taeha gripped the knife, his gaze sharp and cold. Thanks to the Chengdu clan's demise, surveillance had tightened to the point where even smugglers couldn't leave. He gave the order, spread the word about a ship, offering 10 times the usual payment. The plan was set in motion, and Taeha would cover all the costs. There was no room for retreat. Taeha glanced coldly, Gray's question ringing out like a challenge to his trust. "You're not planning to run off with him, are you?" Without hesitation, Taeha tightened his grip on the gun, his icy gaze replied, "I'll kill him." Gray fell silent. Memories of nearly losing his life due to a leak flooded back, and the only person who knew that route was the man Taeha was targeting. With a gaze as sharp as a blade, Taeha delivered his verdict: traitors deserve death. Even if that person was the friend who had survived a decade with him. In the quiet darkness of the church, a figure silently entered, the small flashlight beam illuminating the hooded coat, casting an ominous aura. He stopped before the confessional door, knocked lightly, and spoke. "Father, I have something to say." His words were laden with hidden meaning, as if this confession wasn't just for repentance. From behind the wooden door, a deep voice responded, "Everyone acts for their own benefit." The statement opened a conversation layered with implications. The man let out a bitter laugh, removing his glasses as he complained, "Why meet in such a holy place?" His emotions mixed tension with disdain. Still, he managed a smirk. "I'm Catholic. I used to attend Mass at St. Marty's Church." He was the fleeing middleman, Kim Pil-jung. From behind the fogged glass, a low voice cut in bluntly, "Where's the money?" Kim Pil-jung didn't rush to respond, merely curling his lips before calmly pulling the money bag out of his backpack. 100 million won, equivalent to $100,000. He held up the stack of cash, smirking slyly. You'll even make a profit. As he sat down, he flipped open his phone and quipped slyly, by the way, about that info broker. In a country full of scams, I don't trust anyone easily. His smile faded, his eyes tinged with wariness. The broker sensed imminent danger, turning his head in alarm, his voice panicked. But it was already too late. The church doors burst open. A group of armed men stormed in with predatory intent, their presence threatening to swallow the sacred space hole. Kim Pil-jung maintained his composure, exhaling smoke from his cigarette, mocking the mysterious ship that even a professional broker like him had no knowledge of. A cold voice rang out from behind the glass. The command was clear. Give me the exact route. If you fail to convince me, you're dead. He flinched. Though he tried to appear calm, his eyes betrayed his fear as he realized he was now caught in this deadly game. The figure behind the glass finally spoke. The voice was calm but icy, cutting through the darkness, leaving Kim Pil-jung speechless. He couldn't recognize his old friend. Pil-jung froze. The name Taeha was uttered like a death sentence. The man who was supposed to be dead now stood before him, his voice unmistakable. A moment of silence fell. Pil-jung's eyes were heavy with regret, the truth he had denied now laid bare with no way out. He bowed his head, hands clenched, admitting his mistake in bitter resignation. The password was an Italian proverb, a clue so obvious he had ignored it. In his confession, Pil-jung revealed a past consumed by gambling, a mountain of debt at the Gangwon casino, where he fell into Chenggu's grasp and lost his freedom. Pil-jung stammered excuses, his hand secretly reaching for the gun at his waist. The more he lied, the shakier his movements became. But before he could pull the trigger, a bullet pierced his throat. Taeha, the man thought to be dead, acted with clinical precision without hesitation. Blood gushed out as Pil-jung clutched his throat, his eyes filled with terror and remorse. Outside, the gunshot startled the henchmen. They tensed, white-knuckling their batons, ready to strike. Inside, Pil-jung's body slumped on the chair. A pool of blood spread beneath him like a verdict that had been carried out. The traitor would not be spared. Though his body was battered, he never stopped chasing the end of it all. His companion could only watch in shock through the computer screen. The enemy didn't know Taeha would appear empty-handed. No gun, no bullets. Just a bone-handled combat knife and a cold warning before death arrived. Light spilled through the cracked door as Taeha stepped out, silhouetted against it like an avenging wraith. He coldly pronounced the death sentence for those standing before him. Taeha stepped into the midst of the crowd, his voice calm yet commanding. To him, whether they were Pil-jung's henchmen or just hired thugs, it made no difference. Elsewhere, Gray watched everything unfold through the screen. Sweat beaded on his forehead. What was about to happen was far from simple. The thugs drew their knives and clubs, ready to act. With those weapons, they made no secret of their intent. They were here to kill. Taeha drew his sword, his gaze icy. He saw no reason to hold back against those who had come to take his life. Taeha's taunting words enraged the thugs. They shouted, mocking him as a one-armed cripple, someone not worth fearing. Hearing rumors of money hidden in the confession booth, they charged forward, screaming, "Kill him!" Bloodlust surged, and the chaos began. Taeha tightened his grip on the sword hilt, his eyes cold as if the pain didn't exist. He was ready to face them. Gray watched through the screen, his worry evident. Not only was Taeha's arm injured, but his ribs were also broken from a gunshot. What could he possibly do in that state? Without a moment's hesitation, Taeha launched the first strike. His sword deflected the enemy's attack, marking the start of the massacre. The blade pierced the bald man's neck. Blood sprayed as the first one fell, swift, clean, decisive. Taeha spun around without missing a beat. The next attacker lunged, only to meet a slash across his flesh. Blood splattered as the club wielder fell to a fatal strike before he could even struggle. Taeha didn't stop. Taeha delivered a spinning kick to the next attacker. His movements were precise, decisive. He was in complete control of the battlefield. Another man charged, screaming wildly. The knife in his hand aimed straight at Taeha, filled with murderous intent. The blade plunged into the bandaged area of his ribcage. Despite the wound, Taeha didn't falter. He closed in on his opponent, using his uninjured hand to deliver a powerful blow to the chin, seizing control in an instant. Amid the blood-soaked church, Taeha stood tall among the fallen enemies. The remaining thugs began to hesitate. Taeha panted, his gaze sharp and cold. He knew, if he ended it too soon, things wouldn't stop here. The 200 million won in sight made it impossible for the thugs to retreat. They charged forward with their last shred of excitement. Amid the chaotic crowd, one figure quietly prepared to cross the line and bring a greater danger than anyone anticipated. There's always one who breaks the rules. He carried a weapon that shouldn't be here, a gun with panic in his eyes. Meanwhile, Taeha remained still. Two thugs closed in from behind, swinging their clubs with the intent to finish him immediately. His foot tensed slightly. Time seemed to freeze for a moment. He knew he had to gamble on one last move. One chance, one strike. If it failed, everything would end here. Taeha spun like lightning, his kick landing squarely on the gunman's face, sending him flying backward. The sudden strike stunned the enemies. All eyes turned to Taeha, filled with confusion and fear. The gunman was flung into the air, his hat flying off. He couldn't comprehend what had just happened. The other two turned abruptly. Their expressions said it all. What the hell just happened? Not just them, but Gray was also frozen in front of the screen. His expression was stunned, unable to hide his worry and disbelief. Taeha stood before the altar, blood still dripping from the knife. The gun fell to the ground. The outcome was clear. Taeha turned slightly, his coat fluttering in the dim golden light of the church. The battle wasn't over yet. He stared straight ahead, the knife still stained with blood. He uttered just one word, next. Outside, night fell over the church like a stage curtain. But inside, the bloody act was reaching its climax. Gray's car remained parked silently in the lot. From here, he witnessed everything but couldn't intervene. Gray couldn't hide his shock. He muttered unconsciously, "What the hell did I just see?" It was hard to believe that person was Taeha, injured, yet fighting like an emotionless monster. As soon as he recovered from the shock, Gray immediately input commands into the computer, opening a communication channel with Taeha. In the darkness outside the church, a familiar voice echoed in his earpiece. "There's a bag of money in the confession booth." Gray was stunned, looking up at the church as he heard the unexpected order. "Take it." Taeha's cold voice repeated the very words Gray had warned him about earlier. "You said there were people outside, didn't you?" Those words were a reminder, forcing Gray to make a decision amidst the tug-of-war between reason and fear. After a moment of silence, Gray responded with a single word, softly parting his lips. "Okay." Gray quietly stepped out of the car, his solitary figure moving toward the church under the cold yellow light. Though he knew full well that a massacre had just taken place there, he climbed the steps with hidden hesitation. The door creaked open. Gray gritted his teeth, suppressing the pain, clutching his wound, his eyes gleaming with determination in the darkness. Before him was a horrifying scene. Blood, corpses, and the stench of death permeating the sacred hallway. In the suffocating silence, the light cast a shadow of Taeha's back, the man who had single-handedly ended it all. Without turning around, Taeha spoke in a voice cold as steel. "Go!" Command and approval, or perhaps a challenge. Gray stepped into the church, his eyes betraying his confusion at the unimaginable scene. Inside the small room, a man lay dead on the chair, his blood staining the wooden floor. The smell of death forced Gray to cover his nose, his hand gripping the bag of money as if holding onto his last shred of sanity. After returning to the pew, Gray sat beside Taeha, whispering, "I called Cole. He'll be here in 10 minutes. But Taeha was trembling, sweat pouring down his unusually pale face. Gray looked at him with deep concern. "Are you running a fever? Just hang on a little longer. I'll ask my aunt to get medicine." Gray put down his phone, his eyes never leaving his exhausted friend. A sudden crash shook everything. Gray barely had time to look over, unsure of what had just happened. His eyes widened, filled with panic. His breathing quickened, the shock still fresh. Taeha began to explain. He had woken up and discovered that everything had been perfectly altered. His phone, his clothes, none of them were his. Only the gloves, the one thing left behind, sent a chill down his spine. They shouldn't have been there. Gray sat in silence, lost in thought. The light fell on the back of his hand. The old tattoo from 17 years ago remained intact, a reminder that the past had never truly disappeared. The question drilled into his mind. "You know who I am, don't you?" Leaving Gray no room to escape. In silence, Gray nodded. His resolute gaze confirmed a truth he had hidden for too long. Jin Taeha, the eldest son of Jin Sunyeok, grandson of the late chairman Jin Seoko, the bloodline heir of the Chenggu group, and also Vendetta, the Asian assassin of the Salerno family in Italy, an internationally wanted man with a bounty of 5.5 billion won. Gray finally admitted he had never intended to reveal it. Even his aunt didn't know the true identity. "Is it worth risking your life just for a favor?" "Yes," Gray replied without hesitation, his loyalty unwavering. Taeha didn't complain, but Gray could no longer stay silent. As soon as the reproach left his lips, Gray removed the gloves, a decisive act as if shedding his long-held doubts. In a fleeting moment of reflection, Gray once thought he was skilled enough to deserve an award, the youngest information broker. But the truth was, he lacked something more important than equipment, experience. Gray looked up at the call. The other's eyes held no judgment, only an invitation. Taeha gently asked a simple question, one that turned everything upside down for Gray. Do you want to play on a bigger stage? Night fell and a luxurious hotel building lit up. This wasn't a usual meeting spot. It was an underground battlefield between powerful forces. Two men walked into the quiet hallway. The one in front reminded, just ask, don't act. With a familiar demeanor, he approached the meeting room door. His companion nodded, promising not to embarrass Haejeong. The stern-faced old man with glasses emphasized, our organization's people rarely speak much. The young man gritted his teeth, scratching his head in frustration, but didn't resist. Clearly, this wasn't his playground. They entered the room. The polite old man spoke first. I apologize for making you wait. The atmosphere was about to shift. Taeha didn't beat around the bush. He bluntly assessed Gray as an impressive information broker, quick-witted and rational despite his youth. But to move forward, Gray had to be willing to bet his life. Gray was stunned by the condition. Though he wasn't directly fighting, following Taeha meant stepping into a whirlpool of death. In return, he would be trained to become the most exceptional information provider. Elsewhere, the tension was palpable. Powerful figures had gathered. The man in the center, elegant in appearance but with icy eyes, spoke with certainty. Because I will crush him once again. The man smiled faintly, leaning on his cane, but every word he uttered was as sharp as a cold blade. The silent battle had begun.